need to pay the biggest companies in the world and pay the richest man in the world $1.5 billion in tax breaks to locate in the place where he probably wanted to locate anyway. When New York City and Washington, D.C. wanted so badly to have HQ2, wanted Jeff Bezos to grace their cities with his presence. Without figuring out the financial plan to pay for the housing price increases or the transportation needs, the traffic increases by adding 50,000 jobs, which will certainly be a boon to those 50,000 people and will have economic ripple effects, but treating that not as something that also had negative externalities, but only positive externalities, so it should be paid for to the tune of $1.5 billion. Like Andrew Carnegie playing Cleveland off of New York City, off of other cities, and saying, but if you go with me, I'll give you some libraries. But he didn't have to offer the libraries. They were gathering and garnering tax breaks. On Anything Goes Friday, please do call in. The number is 202-808-9925. We'll also be talking about the holidays. What's going to happen over these holidays? Thanksgiving is coming. Will Mueller or Mueller, you pick your own pronunciation, survive the Thanksgiving weekend? They've asked for a 10-day extension for the status report on Paul Manafort's cooperation. There is speculation that there is another shoe soon to drop. Will that be the indicting of Donald Trump Jr.? Will that be increasing calls for an attorney general who does not seem so obviously a toady of the president who is being investigated, and for his Confederates? And as we learn the lessons of Nixon, as we think that the movement that has been built that currently controls the government has learned the lessons of Nixon, as they have built the Red Wall, are the coming weeks the reason the Red Wall was built? We think there probably is some stuff going down. The challenge of the Nixon analogy is that the world has changed and the power apparatus has changed. And that is one of the things that we'll talk about. We also want to talk about the reports on 1,176 lies from Donald Trump. There's a reason that I didn't open with those lies. A journalist has been going around to every Trump speech and tracking his mistruths. You can call them lies. And there's a reason we didn't open up with that story, and that he ramped up the lying in advance. And George Lakoff came out with his interview saying, the reason for all those lies is not only because he's untethered to the truth, but because it makes journalists respond. He has found a glitch that if he says something absurd, he gets to control the story in an odd way because people have to set the record straight and make it clear that he's lied. And we're going to talk about that today. And one of the questions I'm going to have for you is, what are the lies that Donald Trump has said that you think are the big lies? If you want to offer some of the little ones, the very first time I was given the opportunity to sit in this chair, the topic we discussed was the big lie. And as George Lakoff has reminded, as the stories yesterday have reminded us of the cascade of lies, we'll talk about some of those, but also, what are the big ones? If the purpose of little lie, Lakoff is right, if the purpose of little lie is to distract from the big lie, what is that big lie? So we'll talk about the holidays, we'll talk about the economy, we'll continue to talk about the state of democracy, and we have good guests today. We're going to talk to Natalie Jones from The Guardian about the biggest donors from the election. We're going to talk to Jed Limke about the new election system, approval voting, done in Fargo. A lot of attention to Fargo today and yesterday. Also, we are going to talk to Daniel Dale, the Toronto Star, the Washington bureau chief, about Trump's lies. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff Smith. Thanks for being here. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. Hey, Free Speech TV. Thanks for joining us. We're going to be having some guests. We're getting the calls turned on. The call-in number is 202-808-9925. Today we're going to be talking to Jed Lemke, who worked on approval voting. And let me give a little background about why we so want to focus on voting systems, and why, with all the stuff going on, with the change in power in the U.S. House, with maybe coming to a head one of the most important presidential investigations in American history, why we'll continue to spend some focus on voting systems. And it is that I think that part of the challenge, if you look at the glitch that the president has been able to exploit, that he's realized that all he needs to do is maintain 37% popularity, and his popularity has hovered between about 36 and 45% for the entirety. He's never really ticked above 50, never really ticked above 48. But that as long as he holds in his clutches a supermajority of Republicans, it means he bears no risk among Republican elected officials who would hold him accountable. It is the building of that red wall that is protecting him. And as we think about the big sword, as we think about the challenge of getting something done, as we think about the challenge of if there is a new president and Ruth Bader Ginsburg retires with that new president being president, how will that person even get confirmed? We want to be looking at voting systems. I want to bring on Carol from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Carol, can you hear me? Speak your piece. Thanks so much for being with us.
Hi, Jeff. First of all, I want to express my condolences for the loss of your loved one. And I'll tell you, hippies, I'm one, a hippie too, and I'm so glad that she brought those ideals from the hippie era into her work in Oregon with the Democratic Party. And you've been raised right, clearly. So I want to say that. You opened the show about industrialists, and you mentioned Carnegie. Now, being from Pittsburgh, and actually from Homestead, where the steel mills were, they gave us libraries. They gave us a music hall, which thankfully is still in operation. But they also killed a lot of steel workers when they called the Pinkertons in on the steel strike. So a lot of blood was shed back then. There was a price to pay with these industrialists. These days, we've got Jeff Bezos, the information era. I am so glad Bernie Sanders is taking on Jeff Bezos. He got that $15 wage approved for Amazon workers. Now he's going after Walmart. So I wanted to hear what you think about Bernie's efforts to call these new era industrialists, information era industrialists to task.
Thank you. And by the way, I think it's, in some respects, it's still an underappreciated story. And thank you, Carol, so much for calling. And thanks, by the way, for your kind word. That was appreciated. That when J.P. Morgan, so Andrew Carnegie, he gave away 90%, sort of like a Bill Gates, gave 90% of his wealth to charity. But in 1901, he sold Carnegie Steel to J.P. Morgan to make U.S. Steel, and that was a less philanthropic operation. And right now, controlling the means of communication, it means you don't have to just go lobby the American people. You can lobby the American people directly because you are influencing the means of communication. Applaud Bernie, of course, and any politician who takes that on. I'll pick up a little more on specifics after this. This is the Thom Show. We're back on the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith. During the break, got a question from a listener, and shout out again to Carol, who from Pittsburgh, and asked about Bernie's efforts to rein in what she called the industrialists of today. And would make the point that, to me, the people who are controlling the means of communication are more powerful because they have a more direct impact not only on the economy but also on democracy. They have the ability, as we saw in the last election, Facebook has influence with voters. And not only because people might want a job, not only because people hope that something will trickle down, but because they can go directly and communicate to those voters. So I think it's maybe a bigger deal. And and I will apply. I think it should. I am careful about the word litmus test. I think one of the important things to keep in mind for anybody running for president in the coming primary is who is willing to take on vast concentration of capital, vast concentration of wealth. Competition, good. Vast concentration of capital, dangerous. And who's willing also to make sure that the exit strategy for every startup tech company isn't just to be bought out by Amazon. And by the way, that's the exit strategy. A friend of mine who also recently tragically passed, a guy named Sam Blackman, built a business, one of Portland's more successful upstart tech companies recently, and the exit strategy was to sell to Amazon. And this, by the way, this guy was a die-in-the-old environmentalist liberal, but really that's the win. And when you have your shareholders, ultimately the win is not to be Amazon, it's to sell to them. The same way that folks were selling to Microsoft, the same way that folks were selling to Google, to a small handful of companies, essentially the FANGs plus Microsoft, Facebook, Amazon, Google. Some would add Netflix now. I'd put it in a little different category. A small handful of companies that are really controlling this economic era. And I think it ought to be, whether it's Bernie or other candidates who aren't yet as famous, and there's a good argument for us having a candidate, maybe even a boring candidate in 2020, but demonstrating a willingness to go after them because it's dangerous. It's hard to go after them. That will demonstrate courage. But thank you. Let's go to Lisa from Free Speech TV. It's Anything Goes Friday. Lisa, thanks for calling.
Oh, hi, Jefferson. Hey, I was thinking about, I sadly missed the Facebook piece you had yesterday, but I partake in both Facebook and Amazon, unfortunately. And
likewise.
I ask myself a lot, why can't I put this aside? I recognize they both hold so many things that I'm against, or I shouldn't say against, I don't feel like I want to support. But what is it that I can't let go of? And that song from Blues Travelers comes into my mind, The Hook. The hook always brings you back. And I think it's that we live in a time where they figured out how just to give just enough to keep you hooked. You know, the convenience, the ease, the, occasional reward and price reduction. And I don't know. I think as a human species, we need to really examine ourselves. And I don't know. I think there's a challenge to it because there's a hook to both these companies and Google and the others that you talk about. And it's always about ease and comfort that we seem to default to versus our morals and our integrity, right?
Absolutely right. And by the way, this is when they've analyzed this stuff, they've recognized that they're in the same way that was it Barnum from Barnum and Bailey said nobody ever went broke, underestimating the intelligence of the American citizen. I don't think it's about intelligence. I do think it's about what you said, is that we'll do so much to avoid hassle. We're willing to put, or at least we'll put up with so much. And I'm one of the worst offenders, absolutely. But by the way, I think the lesson isn't, and I got a note from a loyal listener, and somebody's not only a loyal listener to Tom's show, but also to us at X-Ray in Portland. And she said, I think that Facebook is really important for activism. I think it's really important to be able to organize groups, be able to communicate with people, and not have to go through a radio for which, Tom's show is the only progressive top 15 broadcast radio show in the country. And and she makes a really good point. But the lesson of the breaking up of Ma Bell was not that there were no more telephone companies, or not even that those telephone companies didn't exist. Just to check a little bit their monopolistic growth. The lesson, having steel and railroads was really useful for a lot of things. Yes, caused some harm, but really useful for a lot of things. It wasn't like, let's ban steel, but it is, let's make sure they're not using that monopolist power to keep out others, to keep people from earning a living wage. And that stuff, it's hard stuff, but it's somewhat modest. So that'd be my response. I don't think you need to feel guilty for wanting to be able to share your wedding, bar mitzvah, or personal life on a place that's, handy to do that, but that also doesn't negate the need for some regulation.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. But I do think as individuals, because I think healing happens on the cellular level, and all these great changes we've ever made in history have been because the collective has finally said, I don't care that I might have to sacrifice at this point. This is no longer acceptable. And that's my only point, is that we really need to start challenging this comfort that we keep getting into, because I think over-comfort is killing us.
Well said. Thanks for calling.
Mm-hmm.
We got just about a minute. Doug, you've got your version of the big lie. Go ahead. I don't mean you're about to tell a big lie, but go ahead.
Well, there's two. There's Trump's big lie, and then there's the right wing's big lie. I think Trump's is that he committed treason, and that's what he fights for most. What do you think? Yeah,
it is, depending on the definition of treason, which is sometimes defined as something that happens in wartime, to me, the essential test, and speaking personally, my critique of the American political system tends to be a public interest critique. It tends to be one of how can we be stronger together than we are apart? How can we recognize that some things aren't going to be accomplished just by way of selfishness? And I do think that the fundamental critique of Donald Trump shouldn't be one about merely personality, but it should be about an approach to the world that is sending the signal that selfishness, that focus on one's own benefit, willingness to corrupt the democratic system, the economic system for one's own power and wealth. That's the thing that all of us can have instincts to do that. And we shouldn't pretend that is the only darkness in the world, or that we don't have any in ourselves. I certainly do. But that we work together, we come together in communities like this one, to try to be a little bit better rather than a lot worse. You're listening to Thom Hartmann Show. It is Anything Goes Friday. It's an honor to sit in this chair. Thanksgiving weekend is next weekend. One of the things we're going to be talking about is, what are some things to be thankful for? We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
This is the Thom Hartmann Show. We'll be right back.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being, a brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what we, the we who cohabit in the space of the undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around, and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study. All aboard! It's a once-in-a-lifetime luxury Alaskan cruise on the Regent Seven Seas Mariner, July 24th, 2019. For more information, Keen Luxury Travel, 800-856-1155. And did I mention we'll be getting active on board with special events with yours truly, me and Louise, as we visit Ketchikan, Juneau, Skagway, Sitka, Hubbard Glacier, and Anchorage.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Hey everybody, we're back. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. It is Anything Goes Friday. We've got Kim in New York. Hello, Kim.
Hello. I wanted to talk about the Amazon deal.
Please.
I live in New York. The last thing we need is a giant corporation who has more money than God to have a factory or whatever you want to call it in Queens with low-paying, low-wage, non-union, and Bezos hates unions, horrible working conditions, for I don't know how many billions in credit the city is giving us when we need subways and housing.
And it's a fair point, and thank you so much for your call, Kim, and thanks for being a Thom Hartmann listener. My understanding of the HQs is that they will include a lot of high-paying jobs. You are right that they are running an apparatus that includes a lot of not high-paying jobs as well. And you know New York. I lived there briefly, but you know it certainly better than I do. But you hit the challenge, right? To me, it's not like should blank behavior be stopped. The question is, should it be subsidized? Or if it's going to be subsidized, to what end? Which should be the thing receiving the subsidy? If New York City is going to be spending $1.5 billion in tax breaks, it seems like some portion of those $1.5 billion in taxes could be useful in building the very transportation infrastructure that could be useful to serve an operation like that. That there are positive, I use the term externality. It's a lame term, and I apologize for it. It ain't my fault. It's not, it's sort of external costs, right? The economic term. It's familiar to a lot of you. If it's new to some of you, either I'm sorry or you're welcome. It's mildly useful term, right? So it's like pollution. That's an externality. There are positive externalities to a new plant. There are positive externalities to a new headquarters. There are things that happen that aren't just they're benefits that don't just accrete to the consumer or to the producer or the employee or somebody that's in on that joke. There are people that also get to laugh at that joke. The challenge is there are also negative externalities. And if they're not pollution, they are things like, well, you need to pay for that somehow. And if they're high-paying jobs, then that's going to jack up housing prices, as we've seen in Seattle. And then Seattle was like, oh, geez, we're going to have to do something like have a significant head tax, have a significant tax going to housing. And they had to reverse field because Amazon came in hard and said, we're going to leave entirely if you don't. By then, they were addicted to it, and they couldn't easily gather the resource to address the housing shortage, the housing price increases that a big organization like Amazon had contributed to. Yes, because they're doing things that people want, and I totally get that. But we've also got to just be thinking about where which direction the subsidy should be going. But thank you for your call. We've got John from KPFK in downtown LA. Hope you and everybody you know is safe from fires. Go ahead, John.
So far, so good anyway, although it's quite smoky still.
Yeah.
I broke the Amazon thing quicker than I broke the Facebook addiction. And it's simple. Especially for me, since I build and program computers. Read a book on hacking and what hackers can really do. And you will realize that convenience isn't necessarily worth what they can do. And that's how you break that habit, is you know what they can do with just keyloggers.
And so what did you do? Did you just delete it off your phone? Is that how you stopped doing it?
It's not on my phone. It's not near my computer. It's out of my cookies.
John, did you need a support group? Did you get around in a circle and share your story and receive help and emotional support from allies? Or you just be able to do it cold turkey?
All it is I realized that with the metadata that they're collecting, a simple keylogger can basically trace you anywhere in the world. I don't want that.
Yeah, no, and you're right. And I don't want and again, I use this stuff too. And so my purpose in bringing it up is not to wax moralistic. It's just for us to be more attentive to it. It's just even as consumers are more attentive to it, recognizing that their product is us, their product is our attention. They market that attention to other people. In order to get more of our attention, they test which things will be more addictive. How do we become little dopamine addicts? So we have to keep doing it. And then, I mean, a friend of mine who was pitching an idea, he thought it should be flipped. He thought that we should be paid to participate in someone's platform, that a person should get a little check, should get a little credit in order to participate in the platform, because the attention is the modern currency. And right now we're giving it away in part because it's so convenient. Not only do I not want to read a really long form before I click I accept the user agreement, But more than that, when Meredith passed, you know where I posted it? We're putting it in the obituary. We're putting obituary in. But you know where I posted it? I posted it on Facebook, and it was really useful. And I'm not like throwing stones at anybody who uses. I want to make sure, though, and I hope that we make sure together that we're at least being aware of it and looking at it and figuring out from a policy perspective what we need to do. Let's bring on Flora, who I think may have a challenging comment. Flora, go ahead.
Okay, on the Amazon thing real quick is, come up with something different than liberals. The guy in China with Alibaba did, so stop complaining and do something, and that's the main theme of why I'm calling in.
Appreciate that.
Hypocrisy of liberals.
And it's hypocrisy. Why? Because they haven't built a competing company, or because they shop there.
That was just an aside in my own personal life.
Oh, just in general, you don't like liberals, and so that.
No. It's not like I'm like, but these are self-proclaimed liberals. And last night was like, that's it. And then
I apologize. Which are the self-proclaimed liberals?
Self-proclaimed liberals are blatantly hypocritical.
Okay.
And the most recent thing was last night. I met a Catholic church choir rehearsal, and there's a self-proclaimed liberal that always boasts that I have more money that I know what to do with, this older woman that's a widow. And then I point out to her, we live less than 100 miles away from people that were burned alive. They need your money.
So you think she's a hypocrite because she hasn't given all her money away?
Not giving all her money away. Why are you boasting about? I said there's pets. She loves the animals. Why don't you give to animal shelters? Why don't you give to the Boys and Girls Club?
Yeah.
Why don't you give to the victims of the pedophile priest?
Yeah.
And so she's like, oh, Laura, you're just so such an activist. You're making us all look bad.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay. Then I am a tutor, and I tutor for these two college professors.
Let's do one. Let's do Flora. Appreciate the call. Appreciate your point, but do want to make sure we limit it to one, maybe 2 points per person. But the main point is, you say, well, why don't you build something better? Let's if you don't like Amazon, it's a great point. And by the way, though, I don't think that means that someone like John or somebody else shouldn't raise their opinion. I mean, that's the marketplace of ideas. Maybe we have a better analogy than marketplace, but the reason why this court sits, the reason why we have these conversations is so we can be a little more intentional with our consumer choices. Hey, because any of us is perfect. It's not because, I shop at any number of stores that I kind of wish I didn't. I eat any number of unhealthy food that I wish I didn't. One of the reasons we gather in community is not to boast about a perfection, but to discuss so we can try to resolve to be a little bit better rather than a lot worse. And I don't think it is at all, in my own view, I don't think it's at all hypocritical to point out critiques in a monopolistic organization. Those critiques can help open the window for an alternative. If we don't talk about it, we say, oh, you know what? Let's have something else. And consumers will be thinking, oh, what? You know what? Now there's somewhere else I can buy my stuff. Critiques of Walmart helped build Amazon. It helped people think, oh yeah, I don't really want to shop at Walmart. I'll just do it on my computer. Having these discussions, I don't think personally, I encourage them. I think you're right to also think about how we can live our own lives better in accordance with our values. And it's a good reminder. But I also think it's useful for us to think about how in community we can make policy better, make choices better, and help encourage further options. I'll just say one other thing about it. Again, when we're talking about these big companies, I'm not even saying, oh, don't use that stuff. That's not even what I'm saying. I'm just saying, let's make sure that as we're subsidizing stuff, we're not feeding it. We're not just adding to the problem. Let's make sure it's easier so that Instagram might actually be able to survive. We were talking to the folks yesterday, rather than Instagram thinking that its best path was to sell to Facebook. So we can support further monopolists, even just supporting the laws on the books right now, having the FTC right now enforce antitrust law. All right, I'll step off my soapbox. But Flora, I appreciate your call very much. The call-in line is 202-808-9925. Phone's blowing up this morning. All kinds of people calling. 202-808-9925. Thanks for doing it. We're going to be talking coming up soon to Natalie Jones, a reporter with The Guardian, about the biggest spenders in the election. There might be a few surprises. We're going to be right back. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff Smith. Thom will be back on Monday. You'll be excited to see him. I will too. Thanks for listening. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
This is the Thom Hartmann Show. We're going to be right back in just a minute. We're on Free Speech TV, bringing on Cliff. Cliff from Canyon Country, California, I think. Go ahead.
Good morning, Jeff.
Howdy.
I really appreciate you, brother. I appreciate your intellect. I appreciate your perspective and your attitude.
That's really kind. I appreciate you.
The planet needs more people like you, straight up.
Thanks, man.
Hey, oil, fossil fuels, it's a finite resource, right?
Yeah.
I don't remember the last time I heard anybody talk about peak oil. But listen, I'm in total agreement that we need to wean off fossil fuels. We need to utilize renewables to save our planet. My question is, how do we successfully transition to this future reality? Because as we speak, they're building thousands of miles of pipeline in addition to the existing thousands of miles of pipeline that are already in place. So it's going to take a huge transition to do this, to wean off of these. And another question is, like with airlines and passenger jets, is it reality that we're one day going to have a whole fleet of electric passenger jets? I mean, it'd be great if that could happen, but what's your thoughts on the reality of
on fossil fuels
to renewables?
All right, I'll offer a few. Thank you, Cliff.
Sure.
So there's a few thoughts. One, it does mean we need to move to renewables, but having that as our first priority, in my own judgment, is insufficient because of backfire effects. We learned about this we saw this example with coal plants. When coal plants became more efficient, people used more coal. It was a little cheaper, it was a little cleaner, and all of a sudden it didn't end up having as big an effect as they had hoped it would have. So we have to be careful about backfire effects. I think the boldest thing that we could do from a policy perspective, I was going to bury the lead. This is one of the things about live radio is if you get caught into saying something that might be a little bolder than otherwise you might. But I think ultimately it is about internalizing costs. The only way to get there will be to make sure that the activities that I do, that recognizing that when I drove here today, that I benefited the oil company and the whole supply chain that paid for that gas. I benefited the car company and the whole supply chain that built that car. I hopefully benefit the people that were on the other end of the trip. I benefited myself because I got to make that trip. But I also imposed costs on not just that little economic array, but everywhere else because I polluted a little bit. How do we make sure that I pay for that too? And so ultimately, I think if we did a carbon tax, and if we did that carbon tax not only and not primarily to grow the apparatus of government, but to do what Alaska did and give everybody a little check to say, hey, listen, none of us grew the trees, none of us grew the dinosaurs or killed them or turned them into oil. None of us made the air. We share it together. It is our obligation to take care of it together. And if I'm going to steal some of it, if I'm going to misuse some of it, or if I'm just going to use it as a lot of people do, but damage it, I had to pay for that. If we had a carbon tax, and who should I pay? Should I pay some mammoth apparatus? Well, maybe. Or maybe I should pay everybody else who's sharing it with me. That, to me, that single thing would probably do more to deal with the climate crisis than anything else. I think personal conduct matters. I think around the edges matters. But ultimately, I think we're going to need states to lead on this until finally we're ready at a federal level. I'm worried, though. I'm worried we're running out of time. I'm so glad you bring it up. I don't talk about climate enough. I don't think any of us do. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. We're going to be right back. Back on the Thom Hartmann Show. We've got Teresa from Santa Rosa, California. Hello, Teresa.
Hi. I'm so excited to talk to you. I have an idea for giving competition to Facebook.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, Facebook has become the common. Just like email, a lot of people need it. I'll confess, I don't use Facebook, but I use email all the time, and I understand the need for Facebook. I really understand it. But I think it's just the natural conclusion is that it has to be government subsidized. It has to go through the post office. And furthermore, every post office should provide, across the country, we have this network of post offices. Each post office must provide cell phone towers and connect every person, because there are people out there in the boonies that get no Facebook and no cell connection, and that is just not acceptable when you're living in the richest country in the world. We have to provide better for every last citizen. That's really all I got to say.
Teresa, you said a lot. And I will say, and this is, no, I think it's such a powerful point. The Constitution provides for a postal service. It doesn't require paper. It requires and puts forth and anticipates making sure that there are means of communication that the government is involved in. That's not some European weird idea. That's a Benjamin Franklin idea. That's a United States idea. That's American. And if we weren't in the throes of the ascendancy of the right-wing movement, when the internet, which was government invented, okay, let's make it really clear that Mark Zuckerberg didn't invent the internet. Al Gore might have had more to do with inventing the internet than Mark Zuckerberg. I'm not even sure how old he was when it was invented. Not born yet. If we had not been in the throes of the rise of the conservative movement, that even Democratic elected officials were buying into this idea that, okay, well, the era of big government needs to be over. There would have been a really powerful argument. It says, oh, yeah, we want to make sure people have access to this stuff. Let's have the post office run it. It's going to also, people aren't going to be using the mail as much. That's going to create financial challenges. We're going to have to subsidize the post office more. Let's just go to where the people are going to be, because the government built the thing in order for them to compete with sending paper through the mails. Anyway, I'll just end up piling on more to what you've already said. So thanks for your call. Let's go to Richard from Chicago. WCPT ain't afraid of me. Go ahead.
Hi, great show. Fantastic. Listen, I have the big lie and the worst lie that Trump tells. It tells every time he speaks, and it is, I'm going to tell you the truth. He says it in many different ways. To tell you the truth, everybody knows, you know, and I know that this is the truth. And that's his theme.
Have you seen? Richard? Did you ever see the movie? Was it Blaze? It was about the governor of Louisiana who played by Paul Newman, I think, who fell in love with the cabaret dancer, and one of his key lines is, "Never trust the guy who says trust me," and the person said, and believe me, we know that is a big lie. But thank you, Richard, so much for calling. Nathan, you calling in from Dallas, Texas. Go ahead.
Hi, Jeff. Yeah, with regard to what to be thankful for, there's a great article I came across on Alternate real quick about we've kind of done away with Columbus Day, but we don't think about Thanksgiving in the same way as the beginning of the white genocide. But what I wanted to say was the Nancy Pelosi.
Can I respond? Can I respond to that one, Nathan?
Yeah, yes.
And I say it so that you can push back and tell me what I'm, push back on me where I'm dumb. But I view them a little different in this way, not because they have significantly different origins or morally different origins, but the essence of celebrating Columbus Day is celebrating conquest. The essence of celebrating Thanksgiving, it might be celebrating conquest, might be celebrating colonialism, might be celebrating white genocide, but it also celebrates and can be appropriated just to celebrate gratitude. And I don't.
I agree.
And so that's why I'm still down. But feel free to push back or go on to your next point.
There's a great article on Alternate right now. I don't know the author. It really lays out a better case.
All right.
I wanted to say real quick. Yesterday you were talking about Pelosi, and I'm worried about this circular firing squad.
Yeah.
The Speaker of the House is third in line for president.
Yep.
And that's just a point I don't think was.
No, it's a good memory. It didn't come up yesterday, and lots of calls. I didn't bring it up either. Thank you, thank you, Nathan.
That's just something to consider with that.
It is. Appreciate it. Let's go to Zach, who's got a bottom-up tax concept. Go ahead, Zach.
Good to be with you again, Jeff. Let me plant this seed before I begin. Remember when we used to have governors on our go-karts to make sure you didn't get going too fast and harm yourself or someone else?
I had one on my first car. It didn't help enough. I got a bad driving record, but go ahead.
We need a tax law that says if your fondness for capital begins to exceed your useful contribution to society and starts to harm people and the planet, you're going to be governed. And I say we should have a bottom-up tax policy, which is no tax, which gives the bottom-uppers a shot. And it could be a real unifying concept. No tax until $300K. Then we hit you for 70%. And I think it would be a bootstrap for the middle class, and it would also produce more millionaires and harness the billionaires. And I think it could really be a unifying of, to get us to both sides more towards the center and agreeable. And, because it's like we must bolster at that point the 300 point. You must bolster the latter and trust that democracy.
We're going to break, Zach. Thank you for the call. Very quickly, I'll say, haven't done the math, but that probably wouldn't provide enough revenue. But second, I like the idea, thinking that the argument needs to be no just more government, more taxation in response to the other side. I don't know that needs to be the argument. Figuring out how we can be on the same side of human beings, I do think is important. We got to go to break.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. People who support our program there get, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann Program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you. Today we're reading from Juan Cole's book, Muhammad, Prophet of Peace Amid the Clash of Empires. This is from the preface. The New World religion of Islam arose against the backdrop of a 7th century Game of Thrones between the Russian Empire and the Sasanian Empire of Iran that was fought with unparalleled savagery for nearly 3 decades. The imperial armies zigzagged bloodily across the Near East, the Fertile Crescent, Asia Minor, and the Balkans. Although the Quran makes it clear that this struggle between rival emperors, whom contemporaries called the two eyes of the earth, formed an essential context for the mission of the Prophet Muhammad, historians have only recently attempted explorations of the latter's life and thought with this framework in mind. This book puts forward a reinterpretation of early Islam as a movement strongly inflected with values of peacemaking that was reacting against the slaughter of the decades-long war and attendant religious strife. From the Crusades to colonialism, conflicts between Christians and Muslims led to a concentration among writers of European heritage on war and Islam, leaving the dimensions of peace and cooperation neglected. Both peace and war are present in the Quran, just as they are in the Bible, and both will be analyzed below, but the focus here is on peace. This book studies the Quran in its historical context rather than trying to explain what Muslims believe about their scripture. The Quran insists on liberty of conscience and forbearance toward enemies, and it prohibits unprovoked aggressive warfare. It promises salvation to all righteous monotheists, and not just to followers of the Prophet Muhammad. That many outsiders and a not inconsiderable number of adherents have associated it with none of these values, and indeed have often interpreted it as upholding the converse, demonstrates how badly it has been understood. The misapprehensions came about for many reasons, including the imperial ideologies of the later Christian Byzantine and Muslim Abbasid empires, difficulties in interpreting the text, and a failure to read it against contemporary Roman and Iranian texts, a procedure that allows us to compare and contrast its values and concerns with those of others living in that era. The Iranian invasion of Roman territory from 603 forward threatened the independence of Western Arabia, where Muhammad was based. The Sasanian conquest of Jerusalem in 614 struck contemporaries as apocalyptic and provoked a mystical response from the prophet. A close reading of the Quran shows that a profound distress at the carnage of that age led Muhammad to spend the first half of his prophetic career, 610 to 622, imagining an alternative sort of society, one firmly grounded in practices of peace. The Quran repeatedly instructs believers to repel evil with good, pardon their persecutors, and wish peace on those who harassed them. These verses have as their greater context the outbreak of struggles among Christians, Jews, Zoroastrians, and a remnant of pagans who were partisans in the clash of empires raging around them. Muhammad in these years resembles much more the Jesus of the Sermon on the Mount than is usually admitted. Scholars have increasingly tied the second half of Muhammad's career, 622 to 632, to the maneuverings of Rome and Iran, even suggesting that his move to Medina from his hometown of Mecca may have been connected to Roman diplomacy. I argue that Muslims in the time of the Prophet were explicitly allied with the Christian Emperor Heraclius, 610 to 641, and indeed that Muhammad saw his defensive battles against truculent pagans in places such as Badr and Uhud in West Arabia as protecting Roman churches in Transjordan and Syria to the north. It is likely these militant Arabian pagans had allied with the Iranian King of Kings. In short, Islam is, no less than Christianity, a Western religion that initially grew up in the Roman Empire. The Prophet in those years of pagan attacks did not abandon his option for peace, but moved toward a doctrine of just war, similar to that of Cicero and late antique Christian thinkers. He repeatedly sued for peace with a bellicose Mecca, but when that failed, he organized Medina for self-defense in the face of a determined pagan foe. The Quran insists that aggressive warfare is wrong, and that if the enemy seeks an armistice, Muslims are bound to accept the entreaty. This disallowing of aggressive war and search for resolution, even in the midst of violent conflict, justifies the title Prophet of Peace, even if Muhammad was occasionally forced into a defensive campaign. The Quran contains a doctrine of just war, but not of holy war, and does not use the word jihad in that latter connotation. It views war as an unfortunate necessity when innocence and even the freedom of conscience are threatened. It strictly forbids vigilantism and equates premeditated killing of non-combatants with genocide, paraphrasing in this regard Jewish commentaries on the Bible in the Jerusalem Talmud. The Quran, read judiciously alongside later history, suggests that during Muhammad's lifetime, Islam spread peacefully in the major cities of Western Arabia. The soft power of the Quran's spiritual message has typically been underestimated in most treatments of this period. The image of Muhammad and very early Islam that emerges from a careful reading on peace themes contradicts Western views. Muhammad by Juan Cole.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Jefferson Smith. Thanks for being with us. One of the topics on Anything Goes Friday that is going to go today is following up on yesterday's discussion of money. Yesterday, we talked about small donations. We talked to the executive director of Act Blue. They processed $1.6 billion in small donations, averaging about $40 a piece. That included, four figures, maybe even some five-figure donations. Today, we're talking about the biggest givers, the biggest contributors. And joining us from The Guardian, Natalie Jones, who did a story on the 20 biggest political donors this election, and want to talk to her about what we might learn from that. Natalie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, welcome. What most surprised you when you were doing this reporting?
I think the most surprising thing is how many of these names I hadn't heard of before. We've and many of them I had heard of before, and you've probably heard of before. But some of these billionaires and millionaires are able to fly under the radar much more than I would have expected, and especially for people who have such big influence. So, yeah, that was very surprising.
So Sheldon Miriam Adelson in the story was number one, 113 million, more than double the number two. And if you add, I think everybody below the top seven up, they might match what the Adelsons did. There's been some coverage of that. Number two, Tom Steyer and Catherine Taylor. He's the guy who's been doing the impeach Trump ads. Some have thought he might run for president. But third on your list, Richard and Elizabeth Uihlein, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I hadn't heard of them. What do we know about Richard and Elizabeth Uihlein, who donated $39 million?
Yeah, so they were covered. The New York Times did a story about them recently and called them the most powerful conservative couple you've never heard of. And they have been very active in their home state of Wisconsin for a long time, but a little more low profile nationally. But they are, very active locally and starting to extend that reach and giving to very conservative PACs and candidates.
And they gave $6.7 million for the Club for Growth action. Remind people the Club for Growth.
The Club for Growth action is a super PAC that's dedicated to supporting anti-big government and pro-growth candidates. So that's pretty general. That's their focus. So there may be some conservative candidates that don't fit into that category, but they're specifically looking for those people that are supporting business and are anti-big government. And I should also mention that some of these numbers are probably at least. So because of the way that political giving is in this country right now, all of these people have most likely given to other organizations and political action committees that aren't recorded and that we don't know about. So listeners should keep that in mind.
And I want to get to that and talk about it. I want to talk a little about the names, but please don't hang up on us before we talk about that. Fourth on your list, Michael Bloomberg. People know that he's been working a lot, particularly on fighting gun violence. Donald Sussman at $22.8 million comes in at number 5. Is a hedge fund guy. James Simon What do we know about, and that James Simon at number 6, George Soros at number 7. George Soros might be, the number one target of anti-Semitic critiques when it comes to this donor list, but comes in at number 7. What do we know about number 8, Stephen and Christine Schwartzman?
So
Blackstone.
Stephen Schwartzman, is a hedge fund guy and who's been around for a long time and supporting conservative causes for a long time. And he is closely connected to the Trump administration.
The biggest thing that's not on the list, I'll say some of the other names. Fred Eichner, never heard of Fred Eichner. The Kenneth Griffin gave $11 million. The CEO of Citadel, another hedge fund in Chicago. Bezos comes in at number 11 with $10.1 million. One of the Mellons, Timothy Mellon, the conservative who gave $10 million worth about $1 billion. The one surprising donation is gave $2,700. Gave mostly to the Conservative Congressional Leadership PAC, but gave a $2,700 donation to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. That puzzled you. Any speculation as to why?
No, we looked into that and we couldn't find anything. We couldn't find any other reporting that anyone had done about that. So I have no idea. I mean, it seems like it couldn't have been a typo, an error.
Right.
That's, even though it's a small donation for him, it must have been intentional. But no, we couldn't find anything about that.
I did want to bring up Blackstone because as we've been dealing with housing crises in so many American cities, Blackstone as a hedge fund has been driving up housing prices in part because of pouring so much investment money into real estate, and Blackstone one of the biggest players in homeownership in all of the country. But I wanted to talk about a couple names that aren't on this list and get to the point that you raised, which is that this is at least. How did you go about finding this? Presumably, it was just looking at federal contribution filings. Was there any other information you tried to access to get to these figures? Because in the era of Citizens United, there's a lot you can't know about, right?
Right. So these numbers are from the Center for Responsive Politics, and they have a great website called opensecrets.org that collects these numbers and analyzes them. So for this piece, we used those numbers, and we didn't get into trying to figure out what might be missing here. That is a huge undertaking that we just didn't have the resources for this particular piece. But yeah, so all of these are likely underestimates, and also these may have changed a little bit. This was published a couple days before the midterm, so they may have gone up a little bit in those last couple days.
Koch brothers don't make the list. Is that because they ran out of money or because they no longer care about changing the American political system?
They definitely didn't run out of money, and I think they definitely still care. I think they are likely not on this list because they're just not giving under their own names, and they are finding ways to kind of lay low. They also are not enthusiastic about Trump. So while they are definitely still giving to conservative causes, they didn't give as much in the 2016 election as they planned on giving, and they're not supporting Trump with as much publicity as they've supported other candidates in the past.
Yeah, and one of the favorite books of a lot of listeners to this show is Nancy McLean's Democracy in Chains, and her case is that their effort, and this is written before Donald Trump, or research was done before Donald Trump, and before Brett Kavanaugh, before what happened with Merrick Garland, that their effort has been the courts. They got the Supreme Court justice. They don't care as much about the House, and they've been building the apparatus outside the elected sphere. Natalie Jones, anything I didn't ask you that I should have?
I don't think so.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for your reporting.
Thank you.
All right. And that's part of the point that I wanted to make, that I think it's useful to start learning some of these names and start understanding kind of how the money is flowing. And there are givers to Democratic candidates and Republican candidates on this list, to be sure. Lots of both. It doesn't talk about the $1.6 billion through ActBlue, small donor contributions, or directly to candidate websites. Usually that's on the Democratic side through ActBlue. But it also doesn't talk about all of the secret money or all of the non-political contribution. You know who else is not on this? Rupert Murdoch's not on this. But you know what he did? They impacted the conversation hugely. We'll continue to track it, and we'll continue to talk to you right after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. We're going to go on Free Speech TV. Thanks for being with us. To Johnny, the current holder of the Most Patient Listener Award. Go ahead, Johnny.
Now, 4 minutes, that's all? Listen, I've been listening to these people for the past 2 days on Free Speech TV, on NPR, and other media, calling in their support for why Nancy Pelosi should be the representative among the representatives in January.
Yep.
And they're citing really weak reasons, saying that she knows where all the skeletons are buried. Well, she doesn't have to be in a position of leadership to do that. She can be a regular senator and advise Mazie Hirono or Sheldon Whitehouse.
Right, but the first
as to where the skeletons are buried, as if they can't figure it out on their own.
Yeah, she's not a senator. She's in the House. But setting that aside, I think they're the arguments I've heard that have been the most powerful are that usually the job is supposed to be win seats for Democrats. I'm not saying that's the most important job of a progressive movement. That's just what a Democratic leader is supposed to do. And the other job is to pass progressive legislation, or at least big D Democratic priorities. And the argument I've heard that might end up being the winning argument for her is that, well, they just picked up 36 seats so far, and maybe counting, and she helped engineer the biggest piece of Democratic legislation in the last quarter century. And
are you talking about the Affordable Care Act?
Yeah, which my dad hates. And yeah, go ahead.
Can I get a word in here about that?
Please.
Okay, that doesn't wash with me for the simple reason that wrangling votes from Republicans to support a piece of legislation that was originated by Republicans, which mandates people purchase private retail for-profit insurance from bankers in New York.
Yeah.
That's not a winning argument for me. I'm sorry.
That she gets no credit for passing that for you.
Absolutely none.
Yeah.
She's a nice lady, no, but she's been in that position too long. Let her just be a regular senator, a regular representative,
sure,
and let someone like Mazie Hirono or some other aggressive be in there who has the ability to be firm with Republicans, knows how to take no nonsense. And, like I said, she's a nice lady, but she's gotten too sclerotic, and she's really good at raising money for establishment Democrats.
I hear your case.
Finally.
Oh, no, let's get to somebody else during the break, Johnny, but thank you so much for your call.
Hold on, I've been hour now. I'll just take 3 more seconds of your precious time. When you hear NPR and Fox and other mainstream media selling Nancy Pelosi so vigorously, you know it's time to look for somebody else.
Thanks for your time. Appreciate it, Johnny.
Thank you.
And thanks for listening. Let's go to Tina. Go ahead, Tina. From Modesto.
Hello.
Hey there.
I just wanted to check in and say, did anybody notice? I mean, it struck me, and I thought it was amazing, but that the president, I'm not sure if it was yesterday or the day before, came out and actually said, it brought up the possibility of using the military against U.S. citizens if he thought it was necessary.
I also missed that. Which comment are you replying to? I now try to tune out the president as much as I can. If you'll send in, we're going to break. If you want to tweet at us, you can tweet at Thom Hartmann. You can also tweet at me, Jefferson D. Smith, and if you tweet me a link, I'll get more informed on the thing you're bringing up.
Well, I didn't get it that way. I got it from him being on TV.
All right. Well, Tina, thank you so much for calling in. It's Anything Goes Friday. The call-in number is 202-808-9925. It's 202-808-9925. We're going to take your calls today, including from Carlotta in North Carolina. Go ahead, Carlotta.
Hi, Jeff. I'm watching the program, and I was glad to hear finally someone say to talk about what the Kochs are doing, trying to do to the society and the federal structure. I just finished reading a couple of months ago Jane Mayer's Dark Money.
Yeah.
And when I started reading this book, it scared me to death. It is terrifying.
Give a highlight. Give a highlight. One of the things that terrified you, if you're willing to share, that might spark the interest or at least be edifying for listeners.
Well, there's so many, but the fact that first of all, only about 10 of the wealthiest families in the country are now controlling just about all of the nonprofits, some of them, and then the nonprofits that they create with these ambiguous names that people send money to, and some of them are just post office boxes. And the fact that they just buy people's influence all across the board, especially the Republican Party, people who call themselves Republicans. And here in North Carolina, there's a man named Art Pope who owns just about everything in North Carolina. He's part of their summit. And it's just very, very disturbing. And finally, some of it is coming to light. And I was glad to hear that on your show.
Carlotta, glad to hear you on the show. Thank you so much for calling in. Dark Money is one of the books that I know has transformed some people's thinking. Not from like, oh, I used to be pro-life, now I'm pro-choice. I don't mean that. I mean, oh, this is a really important priority. I should be spending a little bit more of my life, a little more of my time, a little more of my attention, a little more of my treasure to make sure that democracy is not entirely subverted. And I think about a few things. One was, and thanks to people who are calling, the phones are lighting up. The number is 202-808-9925. Two things, something that I used to say, something that I used to think about when I was trying to build a nonprofit organization. And when we did build a nonprofit organization, and I said, people will give millions of dollars to put their name on a hospital wing. How much should we pay to make sure that people are engaged in the political process, that democracy is functioning? And if we do that right, we could generate the resource to build lots more than just one hospital wing. Relatedly, a donor, actually a big D Democratic donor, in about 2004, there was a talk about the rise of money in politics around the time of the George W. Bush administration and trying to build a countervailing force to the Koch brothers network, et cetera. And they said, and one of the donors was asked about it, and he said, oh, yeah, they said that the budget to do something about this would be $100 million. That's nothing. To some of these people, $100 million is nothing. They know it's going to be a story. $10 million donation from Jeff Bezos is nothing. In Oregon, Phil Knight, the head of Nike, gave $3.5 billion to the ultimately unsuccessful Republican candidate for governor. And when you do the math on that, if he's worth, that was like, 0.01% of his wealth. That's you giving a few $100. That is not a major investment for that person, even though it's a major impact. So understanding where these bodies are buried, where these skeletons are, understanding where this money is, but also recognizing that we've got to transform this. One of the reasons we'll continue to talk about democracy, not only about the policy that's impacting directly, but the policy undergirding all of the policy that is impacting us directly. Carlotta, thanks. I'm going to shut up and go to Craig from Half Moon Bay. Go ahead, Craig.
Hey, nice. It took me 6 months to get a call in, but thank you. I'm calling from Silicon Valley Coast Side. I'd like to structure this call quickly in about 4 sections, 30 seconds for my background, which I'll give you right now, and you can decide if you want to go further. I used to work for a federal judge. After that, I developed systems for the nuclear sector, then the wind, solar, desalination sector.
Do you mind saying which federal judge? Were you a clerk or you did something different?
I did a lot of things. I started off working in the back office, and then investigations, field, and case management strategies.
Oh, in a district court for a trial court
This
judge.
is down in Newport Beach, Southern California, actually Laguna Beach.
All
And actually, one of my old bosses, Doug Applegate, now has been elected to Congress. Yahoo!
Yeah.
But after that, I worked in the nuclear sector, developing systems for San Onofre, which is down there, now closed. And I realized way back in the 80s and 90s that we are headed for a wall and that there were a lot of inherent dangers there. I moved over to wind and solar. I was trained by GE Wind, and I've written law for foreign nations, energy law, to help develop infrastructure, national infrastructure plans for heads of state and their ministers around the world. And
let's assume you're an awesome dude who's done awesome things.
I want to get to this part, and after that, around 2000, I realized we are headed for extinction.
Yeah.
And I moved everything over and started trying to hammer, and I also teach the young how to hammer politicians. And so the next 60 seconds, I'd like to talk about our current situation and some solutions for the young. And congratulations to Alexandria and all of the rest of them who are now pushing the envelope on progressives and moving Pelosi to the left, hopefully. And if she doesn't, I just got done sending a letter to her and her office. I'd like to meet with them and say, this is your last chance to remain relevant.
Take your next 30 seconds on your highest priority solutions.
All right. So the first thing to remember is our situation. In about 1 or 2 years, we're going to have an ice-free Arctic. At that point, temperatures are going to scorch through the roof.
Yep.
We're going to have massive crop losses, famine, and potentially extinction when skilled labor stops maintaining nuclear power plants. Because when you have
forgive my nudge, we're about to go to break. Get to the solutions quickly, or they're going to cut us both off.
All right. So instead of trying to hammer politicians the way we've been doing it, my suggestion is to form public grand juries through your mayor and your local county to indict. You can't prosecute, but then go after your state attorney general who can, and push the envelope forward on each community being able to make the transition to a zero-emission community within 1 year. And there is a method for doing that, but we're out of time.
All right, Craig. So you're saying get district attorneys to be the movers on indicting polluters? Is that the bottom line?
No. You've got to indict the politicians who make a statement and then don't follow through on it. You've got to go ahead and...
Craig, tweet at me or send in a note, something I can read. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. Break is starting now.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And you can call 202-808-9925. This is Thom Show.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, and today we're reading from Creating Freedom by Raul Martinez, The Lottery of Birth, The Illusion of Consent, and the Fight for Our Future. This is from the preface. Free markets, free trade, free elections, free media, free thought, free speech, free will. The language of freedom pervades our lives, framing the most urgent issues of our time and the deepest questions about who we are and who we wish to be. Freedom is a stirring ideal, central to the concept of human dignity and visions of a fulfilling and meaningful life. Its universal appeal, its ability to unite and inspire, have long made it a powerful political weapon. For some, it is the clarion call for revolution. For others, a justification of the status quo. Academics, think tanks, religions, political parties, and activists have recast the concept in different ways. In the scramble to define it, the ideal of freedom has been pushed, pulled, twisted, and torn, expertly molded to suit the interests of those with the power to shape it. Even as they steer our economies, democracies, and judiciaries, today's dominant conceptions of freedom are unknown to most people. They are part of the conceptual framework upon which society has been built, framing our thinking on everything from punishment and reward to capitalism and democracy. But this foundation, mixed as it is with myth and illusion, is crumbling. Plagued by civilizational crises, economic, political, and environmental, the towering edifice it supports is not only unstable and unsustainable, but unjust. For too long, the language of freedom has been used as a tool of control, helping to justify poverty, to erode democracy, to lend legitimacy to barbaric punishment. As inequality soars, economic crises erupt, people work longer for less, as refugees surge across borders, corporate power intensifies, forests disappear and sea levels rise. It is time to engage in a fundamental reassessment of this hallowed ideal. When a society fails on multiple fronts, its foundational ideas must be questioned. A simple principle animates these pages. The more we understand the limits on our freedom, the better placed we are to transcend them. We may well be less free than we like to think, but only through understanding the freedom we lack can we enhance the freedom we possess. Ignorance of our limitations leaves us vulnerable to those able to exploit them. Facing up to the myths on our freedom explodes a number of persistent myths, myths surrounding individual responsibility, justice, political democracy, and the market. Some of these myths persist because they advance the interests of those in power, others because they flatter us, offering comfort and false comfort. All come at a price. The way we think about freedom shapes our view of the present and our vision of the future. It is a lens through which we interpret and evaluate the world, a compass by which we set our course. But not all conceptions of freedom are created equal. Each is based on assumptions about the world, some of which fly in the face of evidence and logic. A sharp distinction is often drawn between questions of free will and those of political and economic freedom. Traditionally, these concepts have been separated into distinct categories, but this obscures more than it reveals. We dissect reality into manageable parts for study, but if we do not put those parts back together in order to gain an understanding of the whole, we risk losing sight of the big picture. We risk losing touch with reality. This danger is inherent in modern education, where the price of progression through the system is specialization. Too often, where we should discover connections, we are taught to see impassable subject boundaries, but the limits on our freedom are interconnected. A thorough understanding in one area enriches and changes our perception in others. To delve deeply into the meaning of freedom, we have to breach disciplinary boundaries along the way. Insights and evidence from philosophers, psychologists, economists, historians, scientists, criminologists, and environmentalists all play a role in the discussion to come. By building connections and teasing out their far-reaching implications, a radical, cohesive framework emerges, one that provides a much-needed overview of where we are and where we could be. On the one hand, parts of society remain passive and deeply cynical about the possibility of change. On the other, social movements are rapidly growing around the world in response to the interlocking crises facing us. More and more, people are questioning the systems that dominate their lives and diminish their liberty. Against this backdrop, it's time to reclaim the ideal of freedom for the urgent task of putting people and planet before profit and power. We need a movement born of a shift in consciousness, one that will challenge the assumptions upon which our society is founded. To value truth, that elusive but all-important ideal, is to try and follow it beyond the shell that encloses our present understanding, to break through the defining labels of our inherited identity, the disciplinary boundaries that characterize our education, and the limits set by society and our imagination. This book challenges ingrained assumptions about ourselves and the world and calls for an urgent transformation in our thinking and behavior. It is a manifesto for deep and radical change. Through the prism of freedom, it examines the limitations of our dominant ideas and the failings of our current system, but it also explores the great potential that exists to create something better. Creating Freedom by Raul Martinez.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Jefferson Smith sitting in. Tom will be back on Monday. But while the cat is away, the mice will play. 202-808-9925, 202-808-9925. It is Anything Goes Friday. A lot of people want to talk about Pelosi. A lot of people are calling to talk about Pelosi. I also want to ask another question. I want to ask what you're grateful for. what activist you're thankful for, what organization you're thankful for, what's something you did you're glad you did, what's a victory you're glad happened, what is a lost cause that someone continues to work out because somebody's got to, what is something that we should be aware of as we deal with a cascade of horribles that will give us hope and light, and to make sure that in a week of Thanksgiving, we are not thanking white genocide, but we are thanking things that are worth thanking. We are acknowledging our own privilege, acknowledging what we have been given, and acknowledging the wonderful things that our neighbors might do. What are some of those things? What's good news? An elected official, an unelected official, an organization, an activist, somebody in your town that somebody else could learn from, that could be used to have a cascade of hope, to have a cascade of progress, to have a cascade of a movement that is pro-social, that is pro-democracy, that is pro-human, that in an era of money and robots, we are promoting and expressing gratitude to the people who are working on behalf of humanity and purpose. What are you thankful for? The number's 202-808-9925. A lot of people want to talk about Pelosi, and I'm sure some more people will, but let me just say this. I want to put focus not only there, because guess what? The House of Representatives is not going to pass a whole bunch that this president is willing to sign or that this U.S. Senate is going to be willing to move forward. I'm not saying it doesn't matter who the speaker is. I'm just saying there's other things that matter a ton, and that ultimately our elected officials are going to reflect the power context, because too often I would say, unfortunately, that's their job. I don't want that to be their job. I just kind of know that that's what happens. It is up to us to shape that power context, to impact the media that we consume, that we promote, and that we try to build, to impact the local elected officials, the local policy, the voting systems, the way that votes are counted, the way that ballots are designed, the way that money works, making sure that small donations are able to continue to outpace big donations. What are the things that we can do so that when somebody's looking for power, this Nancy Pelosi, the next Nancy Pelosi, this Chuck Schumer, who for some reason doesn't get nearly the critique that Nancy Pelosi gets, and some people think the reason is because he's a dude. But when they're looking for power, they'll go to the people because that's where the power will be. What are the people you're grateful for? How do we provide more pro-social, more pro-democracy, more humanity, more purpose-based policy so that power is the servant of good policy and good ideas, rather than ideas merely being the servant of the acquisition of power? Let's go to Jacob. Jacob, go ahead. You want Democrats to be more relatable from Baltimore, Maryland.
Yeah, well, not just really relatable. Thanks for taking my call.
Thank you for calling.
I think that I just finished reading Yuval Harari's new book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. And in it, it highlighted a really great point that I, as someone in the STEM field, didn't really think about. And it's that, we on the left have tons of great policies. People are constantly talking about them on this show. Mark Pocan comes on and talks about them, Ro Khanna. But the thing is that human beings are not fact and issue-based creatures. They're storytelling creatures.
Yeah.
And what the Republicans and what the right has done is they have created a very compelling story, a very compelling narrative in which all the pieces of information, all the policies that they have, all gel into there. And so people, when they hear things, they know exactly where they fit into that. They know exactly the story that's being told. The left does not have that sort of story. We have pieces of it, but we don't have the storytelling that we need. What is the story for how we actually deal with climate change, how we deal with the big data of Facebook and the lack of privacy, how we deal with the fact that automation is coming to steal many of our jobs? We were talking about Amazon, and they're not hiring a big boom for this season because of 20,000 people that they normally do, because they're finally actually getting the robots to finally do some of this warehouse work. What are we going to do about the fact that the Electoral College in our new system? What story are we telling the people?
I want to amplify that. Do you have a proposed answer? I have only an answer fragment, but do you have a potential answer to your own question? It's a great question.
I'm trying to come up with one, but I don't entirely have an answer yet. But I think that this is the great challenge. Just getting back into power isn't enough.
Amen.
Right? If we want to keep that power, grow that power, and actually do things for the people, we're going to need to tell a convincing story. As we're dealing with climate change, we need science fiction writers. We need fiction and stories. I think about Star Trek. Star Trek back in the 1960s and 70s was a show about peace, about exploration, about the future. The rebooted Star Trek of 2012, I think it was, is a story about war and corruption. And again, even our most optimistic views of the future have been tainted. We're barreling towards a world.
Yeah, the Federation in the original Star Trek was pretty clearly a socialist utopia, right? I mean, they amassed capital, they amassed public resource to like explore other places and try not to mess with them in a negative way. So I want to pile on a little bit. So for people just joining us, Jacob called in, and I learned stuff from doing the show. It is a gift to be able to do it. And one of the reasons it's a gift is because I learned stuff each time. I still remember when I was, as a listening to a guy who said, hey, we got to stop just saying free speech. What we're talking about is purchased speech. We gather little things by talking together like this. This can't just be entertainment. We have to be a community that's working to foment a movement. And the point I heard Jacob say is we can't just list policy or list facts or do that for the purpose of gaining power or think that power is enough, because we have to construct a better rhetorical architecture, and at root for that architecture, or at least at the foundation of that architecture, or the superstructure of that architecture, needs to be story. And to pile on to that point, by the way, Jesus Christ figured that out. The way that Jesus Christ built a movement was by telling stories. It is also how the right-wing movement built their thing. Ayn Rand did not write a policy treatise. She wrote a fiction novel, and then she wrote another fiction novel. She told a story about how Atlas should shrug, that because all the small fish were demanding too much, the big fish would just give up and stop eating them. That's not how she put it. The other story they tell is about the Soviets, the horrible idea of massive governmental tyranny, and why we don't want to take any further steps into government nurture because, well, that's got to be adjacent to government tyranny. What is the competing story? And Jacob, I'm with you. I don't know yet, but I think what you said is critically important, which is why I piled on. I have a couple. It's actually why we opened the show the way we did today, telling the story of the progressive era, moving from one economic era to another, and having to deal with an economy that was transitioning from an agrarian to industrial age, and watching as people were unprepared for that economy. We had the biggest wealth disparities in the history of the country, people dying in mills, kids dying in mills, pollution of not only nature, but also our democracy. And the progressive era needed to happen. Citizens needed to fight for women's suffrage. Citizens needed to fight for the first environmental protection. Citizens needed to fight for the minimum wage, needed to fight for the first taxation structure to at least have some semblance of social justice architecture. And that happened. And it didn't benefit everybody. And it was deep in the throes of our racist tradition. But it was an example of benevolent community, not just hero narratives, but benevolent community narratives, people coming together to solve common problems. I think the progressive era is an interesting example. The New Deal might be another. But I think also the reason I asked for another reason I asked for stories, I asked for examples rather, things that people are grateful for, is maybe there are stories there. And again, not hero stories, not just of how somebody dominated their own landscape, but how people came together to solve problems, to remind us that that is how it can happen, that Medicaid and Medicare have saved countless lives, that sometimes working together, sometimes we've got to be on our own, but sometimes working together we can solve problems. Jacob, I put you on hold rather than cut you off so you could have the last word. Go ahead.
I want to say that, we need people writing about so that people can relate. We need to know, what are the stories of average people look like? What are the choices that they have to make in this future to become the everyday common heroes, to become the community that we need to be? Without that vision, without something to actually cling on to, right, in these storytelling and see how people can fit together in that, we are just going to momentarily seize power, and then the siren call of the past is going to take over, because things are changing, they're changing fast, and it is a scary future if we don't have stories to tell.
Jacob, thank you so much for calling. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. We'll have a real quick one, time for it. Jerry from KBCS, you've been waiting a long time. You got about 30 seconds. Go ahead.
Yeah, hey, thanks for subbing for Tom. I enjoy your show.
Thanks, man.
I'm a 74-year-old guy. I was a pilot in the Navy during the Vietnam era.
Thank you.
And I want to get rid of all the sclerotic leadership in the Democratic houses of Congress. It's getting to the point because all these people are corporate Democrats. You need a microscope to tell the difference between a corporate Democrat and the fascist from the other side of the aisle. I have basically no respect for the Clintons as politicians, nor for Obama and his clown car AG era culture for what they didn't do in cleaning up the financial mess. Bernie proved you don't need a boatload of money if you know how to campaign. And lastly, it would be nice for the Democrats to invite the economic department from the University of Missouri at Kansas City.
Thank you, Jerry. That's the music that tells us we're going to break. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Might sound a little like Jefferson Smith today. Wanted to reply both to the story point and just say, as you have those stories, send them in. The New Deal era and also the Ralph Nader movement was built around acronyms, often acronyms that were hard to remember. Tennessee Valley Authority, sort of hard to remember. Osberg, some people know what it stands for. A lot of people think it's Osbrig. We have to think not only in terms of acronyms, and not only in terms of policy proposals, but in terms of story. And lots of discussion about what direction the Democratic Party should take. And I'll continue my refrain that if we build the landscape, if we do public financing in local elections, if we elect people at the early stages who are pro-social, who are pro-democracy, if we build better media, then we try to build a power. If we change voting rules, we can wish for more wishes, and the power will go to the people because that's where the power will be. So yes, elect the elected officials who reflect that best, and don't think, however, that they are going to save us. They are going to reflect the power reality at least as much as they are going to generate it. We are doing Free Speech TV. Let's hear from somebody who's been waiting patiently. Joe from Cupertino, California. Hope you're all right.
I'm doing great. It's a little smoky. Great show again. And what was that? The Requiem for the Common Man this morning? That was beautiful. I play that for my children. Tina from Modesto called. I thought that was great. You know, I wanted to just think 10 years ago, I lived out there, and all you had was talk radio, right-wing talk radio. I don't know how you got your program over there, but we flipped that seat by having Tom go out there and speak.
Wow.
Free Speech TV in the Central Valley. It's amazing. I mean, it's been held by Republicans since Gary Condit, which has got to be 20 years by this point, and it just flips with Josh Harder. That's such a great thing. We spoke just before the election. I think you got to be impressed. But my call today was based on your conversation yesterday with, what was it, Mr. Hendrick?
Yeah.
And the Electoral College. And I was confused. I think I was trying to understand what he was saying, but is this kind of like with the majority, or should I say, was it ranked choice voting? So we say Bernie got more votes. So the Electoral College, even though, let's say, Hillary had more votes in California, but this nationwide, so all of our delegates goes towards the person who I'm not sure what.
No, understand the confusion, I think. So separate those things. You know, Hendrick and we, and I think this show also, have been going through a lot of the ways that our current system is anti-majoritarian, is insufficiently or anti-democratic, small d. And he was going through not only the ways that it was, including Electoral College, also solutions to that. At this point, things like ranked choice voting or approval voting, those are different things, but somewhat related, are only really being pushed at the local level. And what it would allow someone to do is essentially have an instant runoff primary. Instant runoff voting, in fact, is another word for a pretty similar thing. So if somebody doesn't have a majority, if you were thinking in terms of presidential terms, if you went out, but so far this is only being done locally, and you go and you're going to vote for Ralph Nader. But your second choice probably isn't Pat Buchanan. Your second choice probably isn't George W. Bush. Your second choice might be Al Gore. If nobody got a majority, then they'd look at that second choice. And so those Nader voters who had voted for Al Gore with their second choice would be counted as Gore voters. That's how ranked choice voting, roughly speaking, or instant voting, roughly speaking, works. We're going to be talking to an approval voting advocate in just a moment. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff Smith. Thank you for the call. You are listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. I am Jefferson Smith, sitting in. Right now it is time for Talk Media News, talkmedianews.com. Thank you so much for being with us. Luke Vargas, how you doing, Luke? Luke, you there?
Oh, I am. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you. Is your Friday happy?
Yeah, after my commute out of New York yesterday, anything is better than that.
Very good. I see your picture now. You're very handsome. Go ahead.
That's my prompt. Can I recap some world news headlines?
Please give us some world news headlines.
Okay, North Korea, right? Haven't heard a lot about North Korea recently. Here's two headlines from the past day that are really interesting. Yesterday evening, we get word from the South Korean media reporting on some little propaganda releases from the North, suggesting North Korea has tested, quote, a newly developed ultra-modern tactical weapon, end quote. Pretty saucy, right? This is not a nuke. It's not a long-range intercontinental ballistic missile. It is likely an advanced piece of artillery, which is...
like a railgun?
That's the kind of thing we're probably talking about here, though we haven't seen photos of it and don't have any further confirmation from the South Korean Defense Ministry about what this is, but safe to say something like that. Not enough to, probably by Kim Jong-un's calculations, send President Trump into a flaming rage that he's been betrayed, but certainly a shot across the bow, literally, I guess, of South Korea. And then...
So you're saying that after Kim Jong-un wrote Donald Trump that giant nice letter that did not fundamentally change their international posture or their military habits? I can't. I don't know what to do, Luke. I don't know how to respond.
It's curious. So my guess is that North Korea thinks, well, okay, the other headline, and then I'll present I think my thesis is. So then we hear several hours later this guy, Bruce Byron Lawrence, who is an American who had previously been detained in South Korea wandering near the DMZ and had been arrested and deported last year for being in a landmine zone without permission, has now been or is going to be deported from North Korea, where several months ago he crossed into that country via the Chinese border. This guy's like completely hungering for attention and wanted to sneak into North Korea. Well, he was caught about a month ago, and he's now going to be deported back to the United States. And this is being noted by people who say this is sort of the exception to the hostage rule for North Korea. Usually they hold on to these guys for a long time. They publicly milk it for all it's worth. They ask Bill Clinton or Bill Richardson to come in on a plane and extract them. Not necessary here. They're just sending them back. So put these two headlines next to each other, sort of a saber rattling and then a gesture supposedly of friendliness or something like that. To me, this is like the perfect Donald Trump choose your own adventure. Like, which headline does Trump respond to? Does he say, look, this is unacceptable. You cannot fire a new piece of artillery that's clearly designed to make the South Koreans shake in their boots.
Yeah.
How dare you? And on the other hand, thank you so much. Like, our great cooperation has led to this strong working relationship. And you're just like, it's terrific. You're bringing Americans home. Trump loves nothing more than having hostages come home. And so it's a fascinating gamble to me. And my guess is that they just see themselves as having the upper hand here, right? That if the U.S. complains about this latest military test, that North Korea will shoot back, hey, you've not only asked us to stop ballistic missile testing, you've not only told us to stop the nuclear tests, but now this is a conventional part of our armaments. You need to give us more in return. And that takes us to the negotiations where we've now learned the U.S. is not going to demand North Korea hand over a full accounting of all of their nuclear and ballistic missile possessions. So I don't know. I think they've got the leverage here. I think it also serves the missile test or this artillery test serves to kind of insult the South Koreans too, right, who have really gone out on a limb to be accommodating. And I actually admire President Moon of South Korea quite a lot for truly believing that sort of an all of the above peace agenda is possible, right, that you just pursue goodwill in as many fronts as possible, and that in and of itself lowers tensions and is a good thing, even if it means, you know, you have to take a hit here or there on something that may have previously been of national interest. But this, to me, is tough. I mean, it really shows that this is a specific kind of military threat to South Korea at a time when South Korea is trying to do a lot. So let's see what the reaction is here. But to me, I'm very curious how President Trump will respond, because I think the North Koreans have given Trump a kind of diametrically opposed choices here about how to respond, and his answer will probably tell them a lot.
Well, I have a couple of thoughts. One, I think about the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Kennedy administration acting as if they had only received one of the two letters. The other thing that comes to mind, though, and wanted to ask you, Luke Vargas, Talk Media News, talkmedianews.com, if that is your real name, what? Not the Talk Media part. I get that. Yeah. What are the schools of thought? What are the schools of recommendation for the response? I mean, the challenge, of course, is that Kim Jong-un has learned that if he does something naughty or something cataclysmically dangerous, if he builds nukes, people come to the table to say, what do we have to do so you don't do that anymore? And do they only bring stick, or do they also bring carrot? And now he says, okay, well, we're abiding by the letter. We're just gonna have a big rail gun, or whatever the heck it is. That's not part of our agreement. And he does something naughty or cataclysmically dangerous again, and then gets maybe stick or maybe carrot. What are the schools of thought around the various carrots or sticks?
Well, I'm hesitant to provide a sort of a recommendation, because I have
solve the problem, please, for us, Luke. Please.
Well, I almost want to sort of say what I think is easier to predict, which is sort of how North Korea is going to try and play this, which is to say that I would imagine that with the U.S. now making it pretty clear that we want to continue the diplomacy more than they do, i.e., we're dropping this demand that they turn over an accounting of what they hold, that if I were North Korea, I would actually continue down this militaristic route a little bit, which is to say, if you're not going to get condemned by Trump for sort of these tests and this increased belligerence, I would do more, because this is a government in North Korea that really feeds off of that militaristic culture. And I know they've tried to do a pivot towards sort of becoming the friend of the world, but frankly, the propaganda in that country lives off of the militarism. And if Trump doesn't condemn them for this, I think they'll go further in that direction.
Luke Vargas, Talk Media News, thanks so much for being with us, man. Good to hear from you.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
And have a happy Thanksgiving. We're going to be right back. You're listening to Thom Hartmann Show. We got calls coming up about Amazon, about Florida, and we got some about gratitude here in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, you know, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann People who support our program there get, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you. Today, from Birthright Citizens, A History of Race and Rights in Antebellum America by Martha S. Jones. In the introduction, Rights of Colored Men Debating Citizenship in Antebellum America is the title of the introduction. The title of William Yates's 1838 treatise, Rights of Colored Men, aptly captures the subject of this book. The 19th century Americans for whom Yates wrote were fascinated by a juridical puzzle. Not slaves, nor aliens, nor the equals of free white men, who were former slaves and their descendants before the law. None were more interested in this question than black Americans themselves, and Birthright Citizens takes up their point of view to tell the history of race and rights in the antebellum United States. The pressures brought on by so-called black laws and colonization schemes, especially a radical strain, explain why free people of color feared their forced removal from the United States. In response, they claimed an unassailable belonging, one grounded in birthright citizenship. No legal text expressly provided for such, but their ideas anticipated the terms of the 14th Amendment. Set in Baltimore, a place between North, South, and the Atlantic world, this book traces the scenes and the debates through which black Americans developed ideas about citizenship and claims to the rights that citizens enjoyed. Along the way, they engaged with legislators, judges, and law's everyday administrators. From the local courthouse to the chambers of high courts, the rights of colored men came to define citizenship for the nation as a whole. Yates authored the very first legal treatise on the rights of free black Americans. It was 1838 when Rights of Colored Men to Suffrage, Citizenship, and Trial by Jury was published in Philadelphia. He was not one of antebellum America's highly regarded legal minds. Some say he read law for a time, although there's no evidence that he was admitted to the bar. Instead, Yates's career began with a short-lived stint as a newspaper publisher in his hometown of Troy, New York. His bona fides on the subject of race and citizenship were best established during his years as an agent for the American Anti-Slavery Society. While many abolitionists maintained a self-conscious distance from free black communities, Yates centered his work there. The opposition of free people, the oppression of free people of color was a companion to slavery in Yates's view, with anti-slavery work necessarily extending into questions of free people's status. Penning Rights of Colored Men was the pinnacle of this mission. Yates placed a powerful instrument of authority in the hands of free African Americans and their allies. The antebellum legal treatise was a key tool in the standardization and dissemination of legal knowledge and was typically devoted to the comprehensive synthesis of a single branch of law. By the late 1830s, Yates was following on the success of James Kent's commentaries and Joseph Story's treatise series. The genre had come to be associated with the concepts of law, as scientific knowledge, legal education as systemic, and the profession as respectable. Yates successfully adopted legal culture's own tool to such a degree that readers from the 19th century until today have regarded him as an authority on free black legal status. But Yates's text was also a work of advocacy. Rights of Colored Men received prominent notices in the black and abolitionist press and could be purchased at local anti-slavery society offices. As a result, the work served as a probing legal treatise that fueled activist arguments. Yates provides a window into the position that some activists, black and white, took on race and citizenship in the end of the 1830s. Law was an instrument of change, and Yates forthrightly explained his objective: to undermine prejudice against color. Racism had led to legal disability, exclusion from militia service, naturalization, suffrage, public schooling, ownership of real property, office holding, and courtroom testimony. Yates was especially unsettled by the disenfranchisement of free black men in New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, and more recently Pennsylvania. Assembling evidence from legal culture, he believed, would help establish the rights and citizenship of free black people. Yates began with a story of the nation's origin. The establishment of the United States, he said, had been at the outset a revolutionary, Republican, and an enlightened undertaking that was untainted by racism or distinctions among and between races. This had been possible in the wake of the American Revolution because the founding generation knew firsthand the contributions black people had made to independence through military service and through labor. American law had originally been colorblind, as evidenced by the absence of racial distinctions in founding documents such as the federal and state constitutions. Change came in the early 19th century at the fault line between generations. A forgetting occurred, Yates posited. Lawmakers of the early republic did not know how black people had contributed to the nation's founding and hence were entitled to the privileges and immunities of citizens. In this sense, Yates's aim was partly to restore that past to the nation's political and legal memory. To achieve this, he compiled a history of lawmakers and their deliberations, in which he found the development of anti-black prejudice in courts, constitutional conventions, and legislatures. He followed the professional lives of men whose work included roles from low-level administrator to convention delegate and judge. Their ideas about free black people moved with them. Most powerful was Yates's argument about how law, through suffering from amnesia, could be made right. The book, Birthright Citizens, A History of Race and Rights in Antebellum America.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And you're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Jefferson Smith. It's Friday when anything goes. And some of the things that have gone are your tweets, and thanks for them. Blue Krampus tweets, on today's show, can you squeeze in the importance of population control as it relates to climate change? We just did. But ultimately, if there are more people having to eat and use and do stuff, no matter how many solar panels we have, we're going to have a problem. So managing exponential increase in population as relates to natural resource is a critical mathematical challenge as well as a human one. All right, well, there's at least a response. From Japan, wanted to talk about the Labor Party who won't vote for Theresa May's deal. We might get to that. My guess is Tom will spend more time on that next week. Barbara Rosado Pinder says, hi, I was just listening to your show. I was thinking the donation was made to Cortez, the donation that was made by one of the Mellons, big conservative donor, to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She said, well, maybe because they want her socialist label attached to the Democrats, causing obstruction and division. That's an interesting idea, and thank you for it. Speaking of interesting ideas, and speaking of one way to deal with division, and I'll use an example because I know we have at least one caller who I hope we'll get to who wants to talk about Florida. And not only the vote counting in Florida, but the fact that right now Andrew Gillum and Bill Nelson are essentially in statistical ties for statewide offices, but that allowing released felons to vote got nearly 2/3 support. That support for Obamacare is stronger now, but when Obama was being every day tainted by the right-wing propaganda machine, support for the Affordable Care Act was up. The short story being that there has been such a number, it comes up with Pelosi and Hillary Clinton as well, there's such a number done on the identity, on the brand, so much the right-wing propaganda machine is doing to tear down particular standard bearers of ideas that it makes it hard once those ideas are attached to the standard bearers for those ideas to get full throat, or at least full ear. If they are detached somewhat, they got a chance, as we saw in Florida. That's at least one school of thought. Does that mean there will be a reinvigoration of discussions about changing voting systems, about changing the two-brand nature of our political system? This is not a call to deny the current reality that right now we have a first past the post system, but wondering what other realities might look like and what might happen in local areas, because that's where it's going to happen. Women's suffrage didn't happen because Congress decided it. It happened because state by state by state until finally it was a cascading national movement. On the phone right now is Jed Lemke. He is the chair of Reform Fargo, who just, and I believe for the first time, I don't think it's been tried yet, passed a new voting system. Rather than me describing it, I will let Jed Limke describe it. Jed, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I am well. What did you just pass in Fargo?
So we just became the first city in the country to institute approval voting for our local election.
What is approval voting?
So approval voting is very similar to how we currently vote. It's just that instead of being told you can only vote for one name, you can vote for all the names that you approve of. Most votes wins in the end.
Why'd you do it?
So we did it because we saw severe problems here locally in our commission races. We had a race a couple of years ago. It was a six-way race, and the winner won with 4 out of 5 voters not voting for him. And then we just had more elections like that after it. None of the people who are on our commission right now had any more than 3 out of 10 voters voting on their behalf. And we decided that that's just not good enough anymore for our democracy. So we did a ballot initiative. We gathered signatures. We got on the ballot, and then we passed approval voting for future elections in Fargo, 66 to 34.
What's the kind of candidate that you think has a chance to win in Fargo now under your system, under the new system, that didn't have a chance to win before?
So I think that a candidate now that's going to win is going to be somebody who has broad support for broadly appealing ideas. Our current system, or our old system, rather, I guess, I'm still not used to thinking of it that way, but the old system had the possibility where just you could, carve out a small niche of support and you could win because of it, even if it wasn't a broad idea, or broadly popular ideas became victims of their own popularity because lots of people would run on them, split the vote, and then allow a less popular idea to win. So now we think that we're going to get more candidates who have broader support in the community, maybe more moderate, perhaps. It's not going to help get extremists on the far left or the far right elected, but it will make sure that we get consensus candidates that most people can agree on.
Is the real motivation for doing this so that Fargo is more famous for this than for the Frances McDormand film or than for the FX TV series?
That's definitely it. We were hoping to replace the wood chipper with a ballot box in the visitor center.
No, you should make it. Should you make it look like a wood chipper? I just have all the ballot boxes look kind of like wood chippers.
Well, I hear that in some precincts, that's kind of the way the ballots do seem to turn out. So
that's the one I turned mine into last election. I'm not saying I have intimate knowledge of wood chippers, sir, but I am saying that my ballot box might have looked a little bit like it. What was the vote count in favor of the new system? How close was the vote? I should already know, but I don't.
So it was 30,041 to 17,000 something. We were so excited at that point that we just kind of stopped counting. Every precinct that came in, like the first precinct came in on election night while we were bowling and waiting, came in, 66 to 34.
And what was the campaign team? Part of the challenge of passing big political reforms is you have to some degree, use the current political system to reform that system. What were who was the campaign team you put together to pass this harebrained scheme? And by the way, I mean that as a compliment. I think it's awesome.
Oh, thanks. So it was me, a lot of local volunteers, including Andrea Denault. She was a great asset to the cause, Dakota Roads. Just these are local people you've never heard of, but they're very important, and we couldn't have done it without them. And just a whole bunch of Fargo residents who hit the pavement and went door to door and knocked and said, "Hey, we are having people winning with 4 out of 5, 7 out of 10 not voting for them. We need to do something better." And approval voting, fully compatible with our existing infrastructure, still dead simple. You use it all the time when you vote, easy to explain to people, and that really resonated with the voters, and we're really excited by the fact that it won.
It's inspiring. In Eugene, Oregon, they had a different system. They call it star voting, where it's a little bit like approval, a little bit like instant runoff. You basically give 5 stars for the one you like most and 2 stars for one you like less, and you give as many stars as you want between 0 and 5. And that came really close. I think it was 52-48, and they're going to try it again in 2020.
I hope they do.
How connected are you to some of the other political reform efforts that are happening, voting system changes that are happening around the country? You tracking that stuff? Are they tracking you? Now you're probably their favorite dude, and they've asking you to do an FX show.
So they're Yeah, so I've gotten a few phone calls, and I've called them too, trying to stay aware of what's going on in the country. I was really disappointed that star voting didn't pass. I really like that system as well. I think cardinal voting systems, which is what this is, where you can independently assess every candidate, basically a thumbs up or thumbs down or a 0 to 5 on each. I think that those are the best ones, and that's why I really like star voting, for example. And you know, there's a chance across the country, I think, that we're going to see more and more reform. People are just fed up with the fact that our election system doesn't seem to be reflecting the people. It's just reflecting the politicians who are choosing who's electing them anyway.
The potential, we're about to have to go, but you can plug whatever you want. The one question I have about, or the one concern maybe, hypothesis critique, I'm not going to have time to get to. It's the music means I'm not going to have time to get to it. No, essentially my concern is that people will play so much to the vanilla so that no one disapproves that it might be harder to do bold things. Feel free to respond or give a last 4 seconds.
Yeah, so that's the criticism, but the thing is voters can see through that. They do that anyway, and people don't vote for them. So they're going to vote for good candidates.
Thanks so much for joining us, man. Thanks for what you're doing.
You bet. Thanks. You bet.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. Carrie on Free Speech TV in New Windsor, New York. You want to talk about Florida, where it is warmer?
Oh, yes, it is warmer there. I'm assuming, but what I kind of said, there's a term that we could maybe call what happened on November 2nd down there, the Florida femicide.
The Florida what? Say it again.
Get your thoughts on that?
I apologize. Say the word again.
The Florida femicide.
How do I spell that? I'm sorry. I get stumped sometimes, and I just got stumped.
Yeah, femicide, FEMICIDE. It's the killing of women because they're women.
Oh dear. So
say
more about that. Say more about that in Florida.
Yeah, so it made the news on I guess CNN, Democracy Now, Joy of Resistance. But it was right before the election, so, you got those good old Diebold voting machines. All right, so, a femicide, this guy, Scott Burley, went into a yoga studio and shot down 6 women and killed 2 of them. And I just was wondering if I could get your thoughts on that. Plus, on USA Today, they wrote that he was a middle school substitute teacher.
Yeah. Well, first of
all, and he was
all,
also a veteran, of course. He was also in the military.
Yeah. Yeah. Carrie, thank you. Thank you for your call. I don't know how much wisdom I'll offer, but I will at least offer a response as you requested. The first is, it's horrible. The second, I'm actually glad that you offered the word and offered the definition and put it in context. When anytime there is a mass gun murder, and I try not to say shooting because a shooting puts all of the attention and in a morally neutral way on the person doing the shooting and with no mind to the victim. And a first-person shooter, and if we call the person just a shooter, well, heck, that's a fun video game for some people. The word shooter also removes entirely the human cost of the activity. I think it's part of the rhetorical architecture that we have to disrupt to go against oppression. But every time there is a mass gun murder that happens, my wife says, it's going to be a white guy, and it's going to be someone who's mad at women. And I don't remember her being wrong. It may not cover everybody, but it is a remarkably close correlation. And for those of us, and I say us, not them, and for those of us who have to fight against our own toxic masculinity, who have to live in a 21st century where leadership has to be more about nurture, has to be more about benevolent community, has to be less about domination and control. and where we have to overcome, where we have to root out the virus on our own selves, thinking of racism, thinking of sexism, thinking of misogyny as not merely a thing that is done by somebody else, but something that has to change in all of us. That understanding the link between that and, to use your word, the genocide, the mass gun murder in Florida is a helpful reminder. And I am so sorry for everybody who is living through all of that. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith, and we'll be back in just a moment. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith. The winner of the Most Patient Guest Award is Robbie, listening on X-Ray. Robbie, thank you for listening on X-Ray in Portland, Oregon. That's our home station, my home station. And shout out to the team at X-Ray. I know who's going through the Give Guide right now. But Robbie, go ahead, speak your piece.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Jeff, for doing the show. I love to listen. I just wanted to bring up, and this is kind of off topic now since when I first called in, but we had that caller talk about why don't somebody make, competition to Amazon or Facebook. I'm about to send you down some rabbit holes. You ready for this?
We got time for at least one. Go ahead.
In-Q-Tel. You need to look up the Wikipedia on In-Q-Tel. It's a CIA business which basically funded Facebook and Amazon. If you look up DARPA, the LifeLog was a project that DARPA was developing to track all of our movements, what we do with our emails, who we talk to, and all that. They canceled that LifeLog project February 4th, the same day Facebook was founded. If you look up In-Q-Tel is basically the government and how the private industry, and they look at how technology is going to be. Sorry, I'm actually washing a car right now at my job. I had to get back to work. But anyway, In-Q-Tel founded Amazon. They put Bezos in. Amazon did not turn a profit until the year 2013 when Bezos became in. And this is all through government. So when people on the right side say, well, why don't they just make another one? It's because our government is the ones that are manufacturing which ones we use.
Where you got a source that we can look at, Robbie?
Look up Wikipedia.
Yeah, I'm looking at the Wikipedia entry right now for In-Q-Tel.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. So now go ahead. Okay, look up LifeLog, the LifeLog project by DARPA. The day that was canceled was the day Facebook was founded.
We'll take a look at those.
When you look into the investors, basically what's going on here is our government was making sure that they had the overall control of it. So all this talk about Zuckerberg and all this other stuff going on, basically it's just controlled opposition, and they're trying to. And this is all. I know it sounds crazy, but I'm putting you down some rabbit holes. You got to do some research. I'm writing my second book about it. I'll be glad to call back in, but I'll take my comment off the air now.
All right, Robbie. Thanks a lot. Yeah, I'll take a look. The one thing I will say, I mean, there's no question with DARPA. DARPA was government run, and connected to the military, and and without making a comment on areas where I'm ignorant, what I will say, one of the reasons I like this stuff being more connected to the post office is because their job is to deliver stuff. It's not to wage wars and then use information as a tool to wage war, but the post office job is to deliver stuff. And yeah, the government as a tool can be used for ill, it can be used for less ill. But yet again, shout out to our friend from Modesto who wanted to shout out to our friends of the post office. Marty from WCPT, Ain't Afraid of Me. Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, Evergreen Park, Illinois. Hey, Jefferson, thank you for taking my call and letting me be on here. I just wanted to share a thought of something that I am grateful for. In light of the whole Khashoggi incident, over in Turkey, and I'm just grateful that we have free speech, in this country, that we're able to have these discussions. And I was thinking about Jim Acosta. They tried to take his press pass away, and they were forced to give it back. But if we were in a different kind of country, or if Trump had it his way, I'm sure we may have never seen or heard from him ever again.
An independent judiciary, we take it for granted, but now Acosta will at least get to be passed over, and maybe even be able to sneak at a question sometime.
Yeah, Yeah. Oh, exactly. Well, I mean, just the fact that we're able to have those discussions at all, is a sheer testament that, this great experiment in democracy is still somewhat functional. And that's something that I'm grateful for. That
Marty,
we can
appreciate it. Appreciate your call so much. Let's take another gratitude call from Natalie from Auburn, Washington. Go ahead, Natalie.
Hi, how are you?
I'm holding up. I'm glad to hear you.
Yeah, glad to hear you. Well, they told me that they didn't want me to talk about Pelosi, so I was going to talk about what
I don't know who they are.
for.
You can talk about Pelosi, but it's been aired pretty well. I think we've heard each of the arguments, but go ahead.
I know. I just thought I'd respond as a woman because you were saying that so many women were in favor of her, and I honestly am not. Sure. I really would like to see some new faces in there and people who weren't millionaires like Pelosi. We have too many millionaires in Congress as it is. Yeah. But anyways, getting to what I'm grateful for is I'm really grateful that a lot of people are waking up now to the fact that we need to take action and be actively involved in our government. For instance, who's going to do anything about climate change if we don't? We got 12 years, right?
I am glad that people are waking up. Are people waking up enough about climate change?
Well, see, that's what I'm wondering. I mean, I'm glad we're waking up, but are we waking up enough? We got 12 years, and that's not a lot of time. So I think people need to really figure out, are we going to be able to vote our way out of this, or are we going to have to maybe get a little more drastic and do a strike for Earth,
Natalie.
They're calling for an Earth strike on January, so people might be interested in looking that up.
Thank you so much for calling, Natalie. Appreciate it. Ginger from Eureka, California. Ginger, what are you grateful for? Ginger, you still there? We lost Ginger. We will hear from Linda, also in Auburn, Washington. Go ahead, Linda.
Hello. Well, I called related to the concern of the climate change and some solutions for that. And the solution, one of them is to ask that progressives can consider that there can be a God, there can be this possibility, and the looking at our Declaration of Independence, that's like a mission statement for our country. Anyway, I have a slideshow that explains it called 10 Structures of Peace in the Bible, and then another short one that's called, and these are on YouTube, Additional Pro-Human Judeo-Christian Guidance.
Feel free to plug it. Where can people find it out, Linda?
You'll check it out?
Oh, I was just suggesting, we're going to break. You can tweet, if you want to tweet it at me, I can check it out. I was just going to suggest that you plug it. But Linda, thank you so much for calling. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. I am Jeff. We're reaching the home stretch. It's time for a break. Thank you to everybody for listening.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
That is the number, 202-808-9925. The weekend is coming up, and so is the last half hour of this show. It's going to be great. We're going to have some music maybe.
This is, our book today is Playing with Fire, the 1968 Election and the Transformation of American Politics by Lawrence O'Donnell. The first chapter, Seizing the Moment. It starts in 1968. Richard Nixon was in a makeup chair when he met Roger Ailes. Maybe it was the makeup chair that set Ailes off. He was looking at the man who might have been president right now if he had just sat in the makeup chair CBS offered him in Chicago before the first televised presidential debate in American history. Nixon had ignored the network's makeup artist and used a drugstore product called Lazy Shave to cover his heavy 5 o'clock shadow. Nixon once said, "I can shave within 30 seconds before I go on television and still have a beard." The day after the debate, the Chicago Daily News ran the headline, "Was Nixon sabotaged by TV makeup artists?" Richard Daley, the all-powerful Democratic mayor of Chicago, said, "My God, they've embalmed him even before he died." Nixon lost the election to John F. Kennedy by 0.2% of the vote, 49.7% to 49.5%. In an election that close, every mistake matters. A mistake like not getting the makeup right was the kind of thing that infuriated Roger Ailes. Now, 7 years later, Ailes was meeting Nixon for the first time in the makeup room of the Mike Douglas show. At age 26, Ailes looked like an assistant, but he was the boss, the executive producer of the show, and Nixon was once again a presidential candidate in what was beginning to look like a crowded field covering the 1968 Republican nomination. Ailes wanted Nixon to be president, and he knew the most powerful force blocking Nixon's path to the White House was television. To win the White House in the 1960s, you had to understand and respect the power of television. Ailes also knew that one of Nixon's potential rivals for the Republican nomination understood everything about television, Ronald Reagan, the former film and TV actor. Ailes wondered what Nixon had learned about TV since the makeup disaster of the 1960 campaign. Sitting in the makeup chair, Nixon offhandedly mentioned to Ailes how silly it felt to try to reach voters by appearing on an afternoon talk show like this one instead of a news show like Meet the Press. The Mike Douglas show is targeted at housewives and usually populated by B-list showbiz celebrities. In response, Ailes instantly rattled off a list of every bad move Nixon had ever made on TV, and it was a long list. Ailes was a teenager when he'd seen some of these things. This was not the way people talked to former Vice President Richard Milhous Nixon. There was none of the deference Nixon had become accustomed to over the decades, and Nixon loved it. Nixon made Ailes an offer he couldn't refuse. Instead of trying to make Mike Douglas America's biggest afternoon TV star, make Richard Nixon America's next president. With Ailes on the media team, the Nixon campaign was ready to make the move from being the worst TV campaign to the best. "We're going to build this whole campaign around television," Nixon told his media team. "You boys just tell me what to do and I'll do it." Roger Ailes' career in Republican politics, which included every day he ran Fox News, turned out to be longer than Richard Nixon's. Ailes became more influential in Republican politics than Nixon ever was. We have reason to wonder who would be president today if Richard Nixon had not provoked Roger Ailes in the Mike Douglas show makeup room. Such are the seeds that were planted in American politics in the 1968 presidential campaign. Run, Bobby, Run is the subhead for the next part of this. Bobby was a natural on television. In 1967, he was the only potential presidential candidate who could charm a TV audience just by being himself. All he needed was his smile. Bobby was the Elvis of American politics, the only politician who didn't need a last name to identify him. But his last name was everything. It was Bobby Kennedy's last name that made every potential candidate fear him. As the field of candidates began to take shape in 1967, every campaign calculation depended on Bobby, even when he showed no signs of wanting to run, even when he told people he wasn't going to run. President Lyndon Baines Johnson feared Bobby to the point of obsession. Johnson thought Bobby was the only one who could do the unthinkable, challenge the incumbent president's grip on the Democratic nomination. Johnson was sure that Bobby was the only Democrat who might dare run against him. He was wrong. Nixon feared Bobby too, as did every Republican planning a campaign. Nixon knew exactly what to fear. He had lost to a Kennedy before. Losing to a Kennedy meant losing to the Kennedy political machine, and it meant losing it to the Kennedy style. A political machine can be beaten by a better political machine, though Nixon had never seen a better political machine than the Kennedys. Kennedy's style was something else. Nixon knew there was nothing Ailes could do for his image that could compete with Kennedy's style. Nixon couldn't change his sharply receding hairline. At 54, he was too old to do anything but tamp down his short, dark hair as flat as possible on his head. Bobby's hair had grown longer every year of the 1960s. Now at 42, he had the shaggiest hair in the United States Senate. His little brother Ted was the only other senator with a full head of hair. Bobby's hair was beginning to grow over his ears, rock musician length for the Senate then. And everywhere Bobby spoke outside the Senate chamber, he was treated like a rock star. That's what Nixon and Johnson feared most about Bobby, the way the crowds responded to him. They'd never seen anything like it in politics. Nixon and Johnson were both old enough to remember the first time anyone saw fans screaming and swooning for Frank Sinatra in the 1940s before, during, and after every song Sinatra sang. America saw an even more intense version of that fan reaction when the Beatles landed in the United States in 1964. And now Nixon and Johnson saw a version of it happening to Bobby. Everywhere Bobby went, crowds worked themselves into frenzies. When he spoke, he didn't sound like any senator they'd heard before. His voice wasn't stiff and self-conscious. The book Playing with Fire by Lawrence O'Donnell.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
aboard. It's a once-in-a-lifetime luxury Alaskan cruise on the Regent Seven Seas Mariner, July 24th, 2019. For more information, Keen Luxury Travel, 800-856-1155. And did I mention we'll be getting active on board with special events with yours truly, me and Louise, as we visit Ketchikan, Juneau, Skagway, Sitka, Hubbard Glacier, and Anchorage.
And we are back. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith. There have been a series of stories. Series might understate the case about the degree to which the current president of the United States prevaricates, the degree to which he obfuscates, the degree to which he says things which are contrary or almost entirely unrelated to fact. There has been one person who has been touring his speeches, who has been watching him word by word, line by line, utterance by utterance, assertion by assertion, and tracking those. Story just came out. It's Daniel Dale from the Toronto Star. I will let him give his own headline to proclaim his own thunder and emit his own barbaric yawp. Daniel Dale, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So you found at least 2 or 3 times when the current president of the United States lied.
I'm at 3,749 false claims since his inauguration. So a couple of times, yes.
Okay, so 2 or 3 or 3,400. And you found something else, that he's had at least 2 or 3 just in the month or 2 leading up to the election.
Yeah, it's gotten worse. So I think it's fair to say that President Trump has been a serial liar since he took office. But it's worsened since mid-2017, and then it's worsened significantly even beyond that in the 2 months prior to the midterms. So in the 2 months leading up to the midterms, he made more false claims than he made in all of 2017. So 2 months versus basically 11 and a half. In the 1 month leading up to the midterms, he made 815 false claims. It took him 286 days to make the first 815 false claims of his presidency. So,
give those numbers again. So he did 815. For some reason, I thought it was 816 or 817, but 815 in the month right before the midterm election. So essentially October and a little bit, October and the first few days of November.
October 5th to November 5th.
Yep. And then and that was about the same as he had done in how many days prior? How many months prior?
That's the same as he did in the first 286 days of his presidency. So he matched the number of false claims it took him 286 days to make as president. He matched that number in 31 days prior to the midterms.
So let's start with methodology. How, presumably, Conway would say, well, no, it's not lies, it's alternative facts. But what's your methodology for determining what a lie is?
Well, I think I'm just doing basic journalism. So, if he says something, I'll look it up. Is that number correct? Is there a basis for that story? What does the data actually say? And so I don't call all of them lies. Mm-hmm. I call it a list of false claims. I know this is a very political vocabulary debate. I think some are clearly lies, and I use that word frequently. Others, he may just be confused. He may be ignorant. We know that he is both of those things also. Mm-hmm. But I use lie when it's clear to me that he simply fabricated something. So when he tells the Wall Street Journal, as he did recently, I don't have any tariffs. What tariffs? Where are the tariffs? He knows he has tariffs. And so when he says he doesn't, that's a lie.
And how come more, you think? Is it just because, it's campaign time and therefore he's making more speeches, he's doing more rallies? Or is it more sort of the George Lakoff hypothesis of this is maybe an instinctive strategy, maybe not, three-dimensional chess, but an instinctive strategy to, because when it happens, not only do you say, it's a lie, somebody else has got to correct the lie, and all of a sudden he's guided the conversation and he gets to pick the topic, he gets to pick the fight. What do you chalk up the increase to?
I think this was deliberate, and I'm confident in saying that because having watched basically all of the speeches and having read every transcript, most of his lying in the past has been when he has deviated from his prepared text. So not to defend, Trump's staffers, but they're not, for the most part, writing these lies into his speeches. This is him being Trump, going off script. In the lead up to the midterms, though, the lies were often in the script. They were in the text. So they were putting things in his speeches like, Democrats want to abolish the borders. Democrats have no plan to protect people with pre-existing conditions. And so these were big, obvious lies that he was reading from a teleprompter. So I think this was an orchestrated attempt to both change the subject and to convince people that untrue things were true on important midterm issues.
Any of the lies that you so you've been going around. How do you make sure you watch every speech? This has got to be how do you have time to talk to us right now? This seems like a busy enterprise.
Well, he's calmed down this week, thankfully. During the lead up to the midterms, I did not watch every one, but I read every transcript.
Yeah.
So I can tell you, without complaining about it, the 4 or 5 days where I just caught up on all this fact checking, it was like Thursday through Tuesday, basically, were among the worst days of my professional life, just because there were so many. So it was very unpleasant.
What is this doing to you intellectually? What is this doing to how your synapses fire to read his particular kind of stream of consciousness mistruth statements?
I don't exactly know. Maybe ask me in a year. I feel the same as I did. I don't think it has changed me in some fundamental way, but I'm just sadly familiar with these patterns. So I know when lies are coming. I know when he's winding up to them, and I know a lot of very obscure pieces of information because I've been forced to fact check his very trivial and obscure lies.
So it is 815 mistruths. You said misstatement. What's the word that categorizes all of them? Some are lies.
I say false claims.
False claims. Thanks. Okay.
Word. Yeah.
So the 815 false claims in a month. That's it. That takes some doing. Okay, that takes some doing. We don't know. You haven't done this with a previous president, right?
No, I didn't, and I wish I had. I started covering Washington in 2015, so I wouldn't have been able to do it for the beginning of Obama. And frankly, no one thought of this with previous presidents because even though all of them were untruthful at one time or another, we didn't see this avalanche from them that we're seeing from Trump.
What is your? It seems that the media is flummoxed about how to deal with this, and I don't, and I have some empathy about that. I think I'm among those who is flummoxed by what to do about it, because typically, and this goes also to not only the false claims he has made or the lies he has stated, but also to the nasty things he has said, where it used to be such a thing like that. I mean, if you're Joe Biden and you and you get caught having plagiarized, you don't get to run for president anymore, right?
Right.
Like decades later, you get to be somebody's vice president, right? After you've gotten past that to some degree, but like one of those things is enough. I guess Trump has learned that as long as he says that the media is the enemy of the people, and as long as he has his own state-run media, as long as he has Fox News behind, and the legions of AM radio behind him, he doesn't have that risk, and he can offer a new one. It just distracts from the last one. Part of the challenge is media goes out, repeats the lie, and then tries to correct the lie. That does two things. One, the lie makes it around the world further, and two, it picks the topic. What do you think we should be doing about it?
I think we still have to challenge all of them whenever we can, even though I think that's a fair point about him picking the topic, because I just think, there is this conservative media ecosystem that will promote this stuff to tens of millions of people, regardless of what the rest of us do about it. He does have his Twitter account with however many followers he has now. So this stuff is getting to people. And so I think it is our job to challenge it every time. And I tried to make this point today in a piece in the Washington Post where I argued, it can make us seem pedantic or obsessive or trivial when we are repeatedly pointing out that the same thing is wrong. But I think if he's going to keep saying that untrue thing, we have to challenge it. We have to be as inexhaustible at challenging him as he is in telling them, because he's saying some of these things literally dozens of times. Like one of them is more than 90 times he said as president. And so if we give up on like the fifth time and he says it 85 more, then I think he wins there.
I've heard of at least 3 strategies. One is the ignore. You just argued against the ignore. The second is the truth sandwich. Don't lead with the false statement. Lead with a true fact. And then give Trump lied, call it a lie or call it a false claim, or accurately describe what it was relative to the truth, and then finish again with the truth. And then the other is sort of mine, which is every time I hear him do something crazy, what I try to do is discipline myself to take a breath, scan the room, and see what else is going on, and make sure I also am addressing not just his little lie, but addressing the big truth that needs to be covered. Any other advice you have, or what's one lie that was surprised you most that he kept saying?
That's a challenge. Well, let's see. Well, the one that he keeps repeating, I don't know if it surprises me, but he keeps saying that U.S. Steel is building. He started with 6 new plants, then he made it 7 new plants.
Yeah, that's a weird one.
And then U.S. and he keeps adding to it like very systematically. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger, even though U.S. Steel is not opening any new plants, it's investing in 2 new plants. And so just the fact that he keeps escalating that one, even though it's been aggressively fact checked. Is striking to me.
We're talking to Daniel Dale, Washington Bureau Chief of the Toronto Star. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. I am Jeff, and we'll be back in just a couple minutes.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. We're going to be back in just a couple minutes. We're on Free Speech TV with Daniel Dale from the Toronto Star. You presumably are writing a book about this, yes?
I am not currently writing a book. I'm too tired to attempt to write a book at the moment. Maybe in the future. I don't know.
How many false claims do you have? It seems to me, I haven't decided. I'm trying to think about the book it ought to be. One idea I had for you was an annual calendar where, like, those ones where you tear off the pages and each one is a different lie. But again, this is the problem. You'll be repeating the lie, and you'll take a lot of paper, and it'll have to be more than 1 year because he does 360 in less than half a month.
That's right. Yes, those are those are a lot of good reasons not to do a calendar.
All right, so we'll have to workshop this, man. We'll have to figure out what to do. So I did want to ask just one other time, and I wanted to say goodbye to you more politely than just dumping you at the time of the break. Any other, as you try to process, so you already offered your view that you think it has to be addressed, that the ignoring strategy, because there's already the right-wing media apparatus that's going to repeat it. There's got to be some response to that. Any other advice, either with respect to the truth sandwich or my scan the room, take a breath thing, or something else that we should be thinking about proactively? Because I do think he's found a glitch in the small L liberal, in the small D Democratic media experiment.
Yeah, I just advise people, especially Trump opponents, not to despair that this is a post-truth era where facts don't matter at all. I think people see his shamelessness and his unwillingness to concede and to change in any way in response to people like me and say, well, this is hopeless. But the goal isn't to change him, and it's not even to change his most fervent supporters. I think we saw in the midterms, there are other constituencies also. So I think, if you can get facts to other people, you don't have to convince, that hardcore, 20% or 25% or whatever it was. I think there's lots of evidence that facts don't matter to a lot of people in America.
Daniel Dale, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for what you're doing. I'm following your work, and this is the thing. I will say one other response. One other response, I think, is precisely what you're doing, is to make the news story not the false statement, but the fact that he made a false statement.
Right.
And that's what I'm telling you what you already know and why you're doing it, presumably. But I really appreciate your work. Where can people find out more?
They can follow me on Twitter at ddale and the number 8, ddale8, and they can look me up on the Toronto Star website, which is just thestar.com.
Daniel Dale, thanks for being with us.
All right, thank you.
We're on Free Speech TV. We're going to Robin, who has been quite patient. Robin, go ahead.
Hi, Jefferson. Thank you. I'm calling in to just kind of continue to let people know about a new way to move forward in the information age. Your early part of today's show did that. It's called civil informationing. You may have got a document. And the whole concept is a comparison between the 60s and 70s occasional big event only activism versus today's much more frequent, much more local, small local event activism, which is seen by locals. And I wanted to make a statement to my gray hairs, well, I'm 70, who came out of the 60s and the 70s, and also those who were trained by them in 60s and 70s type activism. And I'm going to just talk about a few movements that were born back then.
Plug one. They just turned on the music, which means we're going away.
Oh,
Robin, thank you so much for calling. Appreciate it. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. We're going to be back in a minute. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. It's almost time for the big finish. We appreciate you being with us. And what are you thankful for? Let's do speed round. Get through as many people who have been waiting patiently as they can with something they are grateful for in particular. Patrick, go ahead from Wisconsin.
Hi. Yeah, I'm grateful for the fact that President Obama passed the stimulus package. I was able to go to school, take a truck driving course after I got hit with no jobs working in carpentry. And I'm still currently in the transportation business, paying my taxes, and I'm guessing that it came back around.
Congratulations, man. Thank you for calling. I appreciate that. And good on you.
Got it.
All right. Let's also hear from Jim calling in from X-Ray.
Well, did you lose me?
Nope, I just got you. You're here.
Oh. Hey, well, I'm grateful for socialism.
Which part?
I'm grateful for the socialism that lets me go out and drive on the freeway, drive on Mill Plain Boulevard. I'm grateful for the socialism that allowed the state patrolman to pull my daughter out of a car and rescue her from a socialist airbag that saved her life. I'm grateful for a socialist fire department I can call in case of emergency. And I think the list goes on and on and on.
Jim,
and
thank you so much. Thank you so much for calling and for listening on X-Ray.
You bet.
Dennis, you win the prize for the most patient guest. Go ahead.
How's it going? Can I ask a question fast?
Sure.
All right. What are the causes of a sovereign debt crisis, and how does the country get out of this situation?
Okay, you could ask a question, but that's not a fair one. So the causes of a sovereign debt crisis are significant. What I'll do, how do I want to handle this? I think I'm going to have to not do a good job of answering your question. Do you have a particular cause you want to highlight because the causes tend to be multivalent, or a particular solution you want to address because the solutions also tend to be multivalent?
Yeah, solutions.
What's your favorite?
Well, how does the country, I know Thom Hartmann has discussed, how in the 50s, we spent more on infrastructure, and that, lowered the...
What he wants his $1 billion or $1 trillion coin. That's Tom's idea. What they do in many countries is borrow from a richer country, and what you see with South American countries who have tended to borrow, for instance, from the United States, or from countries like Greece, which have tended to borrow from countries. I almost said companies, maybe Freudian slip, from countries like Germany, is that then they get stuck with debt-driven rules that make it harder for them to pull themselves out of economic crisis when they have it. They're not able to deficit spend further because they're already their currency is already getting devalued, and they're already having just sort of cascading economic challenge. I'm going to have to leave it with that much because it's supposed to be speed round, and if I go any deeper, I will have violated the speed round even further. Let's go to Jim on KPFK. You got hope and solutions during the speed round.
Hi, Jefferson, my friend. You're quite a brilliant character, and and very emotional and very likable. Anyhow,
Thanks,
I wanted to throw some kudos out to our buddy Tom, too. That show Wednesday was probably the most awesome show I've ever heard.
Oh, that's great.
I've only been listening 7,500 hours. Truly. But yeah, the hope and solutions are one. I wanted to talk to the 7 million listeners and see if any have better ideas. I want to start Count Your Vote. I'll have it up and running next week, I imagine. But
well, thank you so much.
Every polling station, count your vote with affidavits, with
plug where you want people to find out more.
At Count Your Vote.
Count Your Vote. Jim, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Claudio, you got like 10 seconds.
Jeff, this is great to see you. Great to talk to you. I just wanted to know what you think the Democrats are going to accomplish with the new Congress and what you think should be their priority list.
What they have said is their first priority, or at least their first bill, Pelosi has announced this, would be about voting rights, including automatic voter registration. I don't think they will accomplish that. I do think they will accomplish at least some set of investigations and at least some blocking of eliminating Obamacare. The biggest thing they're doing is making sure that they'll block stuff that otherwise would have happened. They will also be added into the negotiations. So when it comes time to, for instance, pass a budget, there will be some Democratic priorities put in there. That'll be, I think, one of the biggest topics to cover over the next 2 months. And that's probably as much time as I had to spend during Speed Round. I want to say thank you to everybody for calling, everybody who participated in this show. As we listen to Beethoven's Ninth. It's a good song, man. It's a good song. What I want to focus on is gratitude. Not the thanksgiving of merely white genocide or of colonialism, but gratitude itself for activism, for our privileges that we are granted, gratitude for those we love, gratitude to Sean, Shira, and Nate for running this show, gratitude to Tom for there being a show, to John, to Rita, to Lee, to Morris, to Jeff at X-Ray, not me, to Bill at Sirius. He's not at Sirius, but he's in Clifton, New Jersey. For Tina from Modesto and her nudge that the post office be more empowered in the digital age. To Jacob for reminding us that we have to communicate not only in facts, not only in policy, and not only for power, but in story. And thank you to all of you, the Coalition of Benevolently Irrational. The good people doing good things for no good reason. Climate change ain't going to fix itself. A new education system is not going to fix itself. Homelessness is not going to fix itself. It's going to happen because of you. The good people doing good things for no good reason, and you are priceless. Definition of priceless, worth a lot, not for sale. Have a great week. Tom will be back. Thank you so much for being so nice to me. Love you. Take care.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.